Chapter 41. Nethin versus Ghost Spider Click. Nethin's fingers clenched around the blade, and with a sharp twist the longsword warped and snapped in two. The sudden distortion of the metal drove a shockwave along the broken edge, smashing into the colonel's chest. He let out a gurgling cry as blood spurted from his mouth and sprayed across the deck. Nethin adjusted his stance. At his feet, ripples of warped energy raced through the wooden planks, toppling them like falling dominoes. The ship groaned and folded inward at its keel before collapsing in on itself, sending splinters flying and tossing the hull into the sea with a deafening crash. He'd already brought down 2 warships in quick succession. Standing atop the wreckage of the second vessel, Nethin took a steadying breath. Though channeling his distortion ability twice so rapidly had placed a heavy strain on his body, the total toll on his stamina was only about 20%, well within his limits. Whoosh! He launched himself off the shattered deck, landing lightly on the water's surface. With powerful strides, Nethin sprinted across the waves toward the next warship, determination burning in his eyes. Nethin harnessed his devil fruit power to stride across the waves as if walking on the moon, using the sea itself for support. Even more disorienting, he could refract light to create illusory doubles up to 20 or 30 meters from his true body. That proved more than enough to baffle the warship's gunners. Every cannon shot splashed harmlessly into the water. With a single graceful bound, Nethin propelled himself upward from the sea's surface and landed on the deck of the warship. "He's here! What do we do?" the sailors cried, panic in their voices. But before any of them could raise their weapons, a roaring blade of sword chi came hurtling in from the western side of the ship. Unshaken, Nethin brought both hands to his hips and caught the crackling energy between his palms. In one fluid motion, he twisted in midair, absorbing the sword chi into his grasp. Then, with a decisive flick, he flung the gathered energy back toward the sea in a spiraling arc. A triumphant laugh rang out as the reawakened waves swallowed the redirected blade. The sword aura slammed into the sea, carving a 10-meter-wide fissure through the water's surface. Nethin watched the rippling aftermath, his pulse quickening. Only one man in the Navy could unleash such power, Rear Admiral Ghost Spider. A fragment of memory surfaced. Rhodes, the famed Ghost Spider, had once joined forces with Admiral Kizaru to bind Marco, Whitebeard's 1st Division captain, in sea-stone shackles atop the notorious sea tower. He turned toward the source of the attack. There, perched on the roof of the pilot house, stood a lone figure. Brownish-purple hair whipped around the collar of his navy cloak, its epaulets gleaming with the rank of admiral. In each hand he held a slender sword, his pale eyes fixed icily on Nethin. Relief washed over Nethin. Ghost Spider had arrived. He was saved. Around him, sailors aboard the warship let out simultaneous breaths of reassurance. Few had even noticed the admiral's silent approach, but none could doubt his presence now, not after that devastating display of swordsmanship. Nethin's strength was nothing short of terrifying. No ordinary sailor could stand against him. Only the crack admirals dispatched from the Great Rote's naval headquarters had any hope. And at the very top of that elite cadre stood Rear Admiral Ghost Spider Rhodes. Renowned for having subdued pirates with bounties exceeding 100 million, Rhodes's arrival aboard the flagship was like a healing draught for the shaken crews. Panic gave way to resolute calm. Rhodes leveled a stormy glare at Nethin the moment he set foot on deck. "Do you realize the price I'll pay for losing 2 battleships under my command?" he demanded, voice low and cold. Nethin's jaw clenched. "Ghost Spider Rhodes, you arrogant fool." With the crack of his boots against the steel deck, Rhodes blurred into motion. He materialized before Nethin, twin swords ignited with crackling power. In a heartbeat, he unleashed his famed 6-seal naval blade technique, 6 devastating slashes delivered with such speed and precision that the air itself seemed to split apart. Whoosh! The first blade sang through the air, aimed squarely at Nethin's defenses. Nethin barely evaded the downward slash, spinning his body through the air as he swept a kick toward Ghost Spider's midsection. The sharp clang of steel rang out when Ghost Spider met the blow with his sword, Hengjan. The force of the collision spun Nethin's leg aside and sent a tremor up his arm, making his blade shudder in his grip. There was no denying the gulf in strength between a regional vice admiral and a headquarters vice admiral. The former was charged with defending a single quadrant, east, west, north, or south sea, while the latter oversaw the entire Grand Maritime route. As a rear admiral of Navy headquarters, Ghost Spider didn't just master all 6 naval sword styles. He wielded the dual-color domination technique as naturally as breathing. After trading a flurry of strikes, both men broke off and stepped back. Nethin's voice was level as he surveyed the damage. If losing 2 warships irks you, consider that merely a warm-up. Ghost Spider's lips curved into a cold smile. Regret, you say? A shame it took this fight for me to feel any. He paused, eyes narrowing. But perhaps that's what it takes. Nethin met his gaze, an unreadable expression on his face. Then let us see how much more you'll regret it. What the Admiral truly regretted wasn't branding Rhodes a pirate, but failing to neutralize Lieutenant Colonel Laika, the Navy's own waste moth, before now. The situation had spiraled beyond recovery. The Navy would never bend its rules for a single officer. Only by crushing Rhodes at sea could they safeguard their honor and send a clear warning to every upstart outlaws prowling the waves. And your refusal to enlist proves you have no shred of justice in your heart, Ghost Spider hissed, his voice as cold as steel. Even if you once believed otherwise, you'd inevitably stray into wrongdoing, so spare us the arguments. With that, he advanced in one fluid motion. His left hand swept his sword in a low arc, while his right cleaved down in a cross-slash, unleashing a shimmering blade chi toward Nethin. Nice excuse, Nethin drawled, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He slammed his fist into the heart of the oncoming sword chi. His spiraling power erupted outward, tearing the slash apart. Fractured shards of blade chi sprayed across the deck, one jagged fragment gouging a deep crack into the wooden planks. Nethin's fist smashed through the Ghost Spider's wave of sword chi. Seizing the moment, he lunged forward, coiling lethal rotational force into his blow and driving his fist deep into the creature's chest. He didn't waste a single word. There was no truce between him and the Navy. Every admiral he felled promised a chance at innate proficiency, and in his eyes, the Navy's officers were nothing more than prey. The Ghost Spider snarled, crossing its twin blades in a crystalline clash to deflect Nethin's strike. In one fluid motion, it reversed the swords, leapt skyward, and unleashed a vicious roundhouse kick. The brutal force of the sweep fused with the sword's lingering chi, weaving into a crackling net of energy that surged toward Nethin. His expression never wavered. Hands rising in a high-low stance, he plucked the incoming sword chi net from the air, and with savage strength, tore it apart. Splitting the weave in two, he stepped through the rent space, spinning into a deadly dance. In that heartbeat, his form blurred and multiplied into 3 perfect images. As one, the trio advanced, closing in on the Ghost Spider from 3 sides, cutting off every avenue of escape and preparing to strike again. In its original form, the Twisted Fruit's power could only bend light, nothing more than a minor distortion. But Nethin has pushed that ability far beyond simple refraction. Now by way, ARPing light itself, he can summon 2 phantom duplicates indistinguishable from the real him. These illusory clones not only look like Nethin, they move, strike, and react exactly as he would. Even the most disciplined fighters feel the impact of these avatars. Though every opponent knows they're mere illusions, the moment a fist swings toward them, muscle memory takes over. They instinctively block or dodge, buying Nethin precious openings to turn the tide of battle in his favor. Chapter 42, Life Returns, Tips for Carving Insects. 3 identical figures of Nethin closed in around the Ghost Spider, hemming the 2-sworded assassin on all sides. The spider snorted in disdain, its twin blades whirling into a deadly blossom of steel. 2 phantom clones were swept aside in a glittering arc as the real Ghost Spider lunged for Nethin's flank. But Nethin was ready. As the assassin's sword chi split the air, Nethin caught the crackling energy between his empty palms, twisting it into a tight orb before flinging it back like a deadly boomerang. The Ghost Spider scowled, lifting a boot to kick the incoming sphere aside with a sharp smack. In that instant of distraction, Nethin surged forward, channeling a burst of distortion energy into his fist. At the same moment, his 2 remaining phantoms struck left and right, their punches converging on the Ghost Spider from 3 directions. The assassin had mastered steel, but Nethin's coordinated assault, drawing on every ounce of his power, threatened to shatter even her legendary defense. Although Nethin recognized the two figures at his flanks as nothing more than phantom clones, his instincts still screamed at him when Ghost Spider's sword arced for his chest. He ducked, too late to avoid the blow entirely, and metal rang against plated gauntlet. The dark aura coiling around Ghost Spider's twin blades wavered, making them tremble and drone with latent power. Nethin let out a low chuckle. "You'll have to do better than that." With a powerful sidestep and a driving kick, he upset the nearest clone, then tumbled aside. His illusions shifted fluidly, encircling Ghost Spider in a swirling ring. Ghost Spider's lips curled into a grim snarl, and without so much as a glance, he closed his eyes. He wouldn't watch the dance of blades. Instead, he reached deep into his training, invoking the six-fold perception of the sea, a naval technique that lets one see with ears and hear with eyes. Every stray footstep, every whispered breath, any shift in the air gave him Nethin's exact location. Focusing his ki, he raised both swords. The black energy that had once swirled loosely around each blade contracted violently, drawing in until the auras fused into one. When the darkness stilled, his twin swords gleamed with an impossible obsidian sheen, as if shadows themselves had been hammered into steel. Nethin sized up the Ghost Spider's armored coating with a single glance. It wasn't merely strong. It had clearly surpassed the basic threshold of hardening technique and stepped into true dominance. Unfazed, he dispelled his phantom clone in an instant and unleashed the full might of his Twisted Fruit power. "Twisted Fist!" he roared, his arms distorting as he struck. At the same moment, the Ghost Spider's twin blades converged into one devastating slash. With a thunderous hum, Nethin's spiraling force met the blade in midair. Yet the fist and sword never quite touched. They froze half an inch apart, locked by crackling tensions of sword energy and frenzied twisting power that sparked like raw electricity. Then the two forces detonated together in a colossal boom. The shockwave ripped through the deck beneath them, splintering wood and sending shattered planks flying in all directions. When the dust settled, the floor where Nethin and the Ghost Spider stood was nothing more than a ruined, jagged wasteland. When the dust finally cleared, both Nethin and the Ghost Spider staggered backward 2 paces, nearly mirroring each other's retreat. It was a shock to the Admiral. Here, face to face with a pirate who'd never even set foot on the Grand Line, he found himself locked in a dead-even exchange. Ghost Spider, one of the Marine Headquarters' senior officers, narrowed his eyes in disbelief. He had assumed a West Blue pirate, with no Grand Line experience, would be little more than a nuisance. Yet Nethin had drawn out the full power of his devil fruit and turned the fight into a stalemate. Such audacity from a newcomer was unacceptable. Before the Admiral could weigh his next move, Nethin struck again. A low hum rippled through the air, and the world around them seemed to dim as if swallowed by a sudden eclipse. Then, from a single point between Nethin's brows, a blinding flare erupted, like a flash bomb detonating inches from Ghost Spider's face. Pain shot through the Admiral's eyes, forcing him to squeeze them shut against the searing brilliance. Nethin drew on his distortion power, splitting himself into 2 flickering clones before channeling blinding light into a single, searing flash. The sudden flare stabbed at the Ghost Spider's eyes. It staggered, howling in pain, and even the distant naval officers winced, pressing hands to their faces as tears streamed down. Seizing the moment, Nethin surged forward. With a fierce roar, he drove a solid punch into the Ghost Spider's ribs. Blinded and off balance, the creature swung its sword in desperation, but the blade barely diverted the blow. It still rocked the spider back onto unsteady legs. Boom, boom. Nethin didn't let up. Each fist descended like a hammer strike, unleashing a tempest of violence. The ground trembled beneath the onslaught. Though armored and battle-hardened, the Ghost Spider couldn't withstand Nethin's warped strength. Every impact sent jolts of agony through its limbs, and with a gasp of frustration, half roar, half plea, it thrust its sword aside, voice cracking as it barked, "Get out of here!" Titanic muscles coiled in Nethin's arms as he prepared for the next exchange, determination flaring in his eyes. The Ghost Spider's retreat was only the beginning. After being driven back a dozen paces, the Ghost Spider let out a bestial roar, sprang forward, and swept his legs in a vicious arc, his kick aimed straight for Nethin's face. Boom, boom. Nethin thrust up his arm, concentrating every ounce of his sword chi into a writhing, serpentine barrier. The coiling energy buckled under his control and snapped down to the ground in an instant. Though the ghost spider's vision had returned, he stubbornly kept his eyes shut, irate at Nethin's trick to rob him of sight. "You've gone too far, little devil of the western seas," he snarled, voice icy. "Do you even know why they call me the ghost spider? Because—" His words trailed off as a strange aura erupted around him. Long strands of hair along his shoulders and down his back lifted into the air, twisting together until they formed 6 spidery limbs. One by one, those inhuman legs produced long black blades from hidden sheaths in his coat. In moments, he stood armed with 8 swords, each held in a rigid, menacing stance. Nethin watched the grotesque transformation, a flash of realization in his eyes. Could his life truly have returned? Nethin wasn't particularly impressed by the ghost spider's reveal. All this time, he'd assumed his opponent was merely an animal spider fruit zone user, a monstrous hybrid with uncanny strength and agility. He never expected this to be the work of a top-tier mastery, the life renewal body art. Even the greatest adepts of the 6 naval styles struggle to unlock its secrets. Legends say it grants absolute control over one's own flesh, hair, even internal organs, allowing the practitioner to reshape or restore their body at will. Though Nethin had never traveled the Great Route himself, his keen intuition recognized both its raw power and its domineering presence. The ghost spider's grin widened into a feral snarl, fangs gleaming in the dim light. During the Summit War, life renewal had been one of his go-to tricks. Now it was his final, devastating gambit, and he meant to use it without mercy to crush Nethin once and for all. Chapter 43 Reversal. That expression, is his hair, actually moving? Farther down the line, the wounded naval officers who'd recoiled at Rhodes' fiery glare were now blinking through fresh tears, their pain subsiding. Yet when they raised their heads and saw the ghost spider's true form, every one of them froze in stunned silence. Lieutenant Cordell, Colonel Hartley's adjutant, stared in disbelief. "Life return," he breathed. "I've only seen it twice. Never against the ghost hand Rhodes. I didn't expect the ghost spider general would even possess such a technique. If he can deploy life return at full strength, this battle may already be decided." Murmurs of awe rippled through the support contingent stationed behind the front line. On the field itself, the ghost spider stood transformed. His once tidy hair writhed like living silk, strands knitting together into a grotesque spider-like hood. From it sprouted 6 slender longswords, each blade quivering with lethal promise. The very air seemed to shudder around him. This was no mere warrior, but a nightmare given form, a veritable ghost spider. "What you just felt was the second sword style," the ghost spider intoned in a cold, detached voice. "Now witness the 10 sword style." His face went impassive, almost serene, but his eyes burned with feral intent. In a heartbeat, he lunged forward, blades converging in a blur of steel toward Nethin's heart. Dust leapt from the ground beneath his feet as he surged across the yard, every step measured, every sword poised to strike. Nethin's breath hitched. He knew this move's reputation, 10 deadly arcs unleashed in the time it takes to blink. Summoning every ounce of focus, he tightened his grip on his blade, ready to deflect the onslaught that could very well end the fight, and his life, in an instant. 6 long blades strapped to the ghost spider's 6 legs, and 2 gleaming swords, clutched in its clawed hands, sliced through the air in perfect unison. With a single, vertical swing, the creature wove its sword chi into a shimmering net that plunged toward Nethin like a living trap. At the same moment, it sprang upward, its legs whipping out 2 more waves of sword chi that braided into the falling mesh, transforming it into an even deadlier snare. Calm and focused, Nethin tapped into the power of his twisted fruit. Energy crackled around his fists as he drove his palms outward, tearing the glowing web apart with sheer force. The strands of sword chi snapped and scattered. No hair-whip sword art could rival the brute strength he wielded. Stepping over the shredded remnants, he surged forward, eyes steady and untroubled. In response, the ghost spider slammed its 2 arm swords together to block Nethin's hammering fist, while the 6 blade-tipped legs descended in a lethal rain. Swords sliced through the air with a chorus of shrill whistles, each strike aiming to overwhelm the two arms of the lone fighter. But Nethin was ready. He braced himself, gathering his own chi as the first two blades clashed against his forearms, and the rest came sweeping down in a deadly embrace. Nethin found himself caught in a gleaming web of steel, 6 long swords interlacing midair, closing in on him from every direction. He unleashed his paper talismans in a desperate bid to break free, but for every blade he warded off, another sliced through. A searing edge tore through his tunic and bit into his flesh, leaving a hot line of pain across his side. Thanks to his devil fruit ability, a shimmering aura that coated his body, none of the strikes cut deeper than the surface. And compared to the fearsome twin blades the ghost spider usually wielded, these 6 rusted swords were mere toys. Still, in less time than it takes to draw a deep breath, Nethin's skin was mottled with more than a dozen fresh wounds. Red droplets spattered the ground beneath him. Opposite him, the ghost spider bore its own scars of battle. One sword had snapped off where it wound in the creature's tangled hair, the broken steel clattering to the earth. 2 more were chipped and bent, their DG is dull. The spider's right arm throbbed, tendons visibly strained beneath its pale, chitinous skin. Its regenerative gift flared to repair torn muscle and bone, but each pulse of healing left it visibly drained. Maintaining that rock-hard, armored carapace against Nethin's relentless attacks was a slow, exhausting torture. A cold, rasping voice drifted through the chaos. "Why struggle against tides of justice?" the ghost spider hissed, eyes glowing with eerie light. "Your fate is sealed." Nethin's chest heaved with exertion, blood still oozing from half a dozen fresh cuts. Yet he straightened his shoulders, summoned whatever strength remained. Steel flashed around him, the net tightening. But in that moment, beneath a rain of sparks and sweat, something fierce and unyielding stirred in his veins. He would not go down without a fight. Nethin stood exposed in the whirlwind of blades. The ghost spider commanded 7 spectral swords, each one spinning and slashing in a relentless storm of steel. Their combined assault was supposed to shred him to pieces. "Justice," the ghost spider had boasted, but all it did was tear at his tattered tunic and carve shallow cuts across his flesh. Blood trickled down his arms and chest, yet his face remained eerily calm, his eyes cold and unblinking. That stillness was unsettling, an unspoken promise that nothing could break his resolve. With a quiet exhalation, Nethin began to fight back. He launched a series of short, powerful punches, each blow colliding with the ghost spider's sword energy in a cascade of sparks. Every time a blade swung at him, he met it head-on, shattering its force and forcing it off course. Cuts and bruises multiplied across his body, but inside him there was only growing clarity, as pure and clear as water flowing through a hidden mountain spring. As the battle wore on, the once chaotic dance of falling swords started to slow in Nethin's perception. What had been a deadly blur became distinct arcs beneath his gaze. He saw the gleaming curve of each blade before it finished its descent. First, a sword only grazed his shoulder. Then another merely nicked his ankle. Before long, none of them managed even to catch his clothing. Nethin's footwork was light and fluid, like a fish weaving through currents, and he slipped past the ghost spider's every strike. From his vantage, the ghost spider looked smaller now. Panic flickered in its many-eyed mask as it realized its storm of steel had lost all power over him. Nethin's serene countenance never wavered. In that moment, it was clear. This was no ordinary opponent, and the ghost spider's promise of justice rang hollow in the face of his unshakable composure. Nethin clearly had the upper hand at first, but bit by bit, the momentum slipped away. His evasive maneuvers looked almost identical to the Navy 6th Division's famed paper art, yet there was a vital difference. Paper art is purely defensive. You can dodge any blow, but the instant you want to strike back, you must exit the technique entirely. Nethin, by contrast, wove offense and defense into a single, seamless flow. Each dodge pivoted into an attack, each feint luring the next counterstrike. His timing was flawless, his judgments unerring. Then, an invisible wave rippled through the air. The ghost spider's eyes snapped open in astonishment. A faint shimmer of color, too potent to be mere willpower, pulsed around Nethin. If Nethin had mastered such power, surely he would have revealed it long ago. There was only one logical explanation. He'd awakened it here in the heat of battle. After all, haki often erupts spontaneously when life hangs in the balance. The ghost spider had faced fighters who triggered haki on the fly before, but only in the New World, in the second half of the Grand Line, where the fiercest powers dwell. He never imagined a pirate from the West Blue, a simple upstart like Nethin, could command such strength. And yet there it was, undeniable proof that this battle would be far different from any he'd fought before. If you've never fought along the Grand Route, never stared down true life-and-death terror, how could you possibly summon such overwhelming power? Ghost Spider's thoughts raced as he watched Nethin's aura flare like a living thing. Every trick, every feint he'd relied on moments before had lost its edge the instant Nethin turned that raw force on him. Worse still was the Twisted Fruit's curse. Even when Ghost Spider managed to match Nethin blow for blow, the constant distortion seeped into his body, sapping his strength bit by bit, like a frog slowly cooked in warm water until it no longer notices the heat. By the time he realized the danger, his arms had gone numb, and his swordplay dragged like a half-remembered dance. Boom! Nethin's next fist crashed into the air around Ghost Spider's blade. The dark energy that had swirled into a protective shroud exploded outward, sending jagged fragments of force scattering. Under the pressure, the blade itself screamed, bending and cracking along its length. In an instant, every advantage Ghost Spider had counted on was gone. The balance of power lay shattered at Nethin's feet. The great fleet's decks fell deathly silent as sailors stared in stunned disbelief. For minutes, the Ghost Spider had held Nethin under its terrible sway, every blow crushing his defenses. Yet now, as if answerable to some unseen decree of justice, the tide of battle shifted. Nethin's breathing was steady. He locked eyes with the Ghost Spider, its many-limbed silhouette wavering in the salt-sprayed haze, and took a single deliberate step forward. When he struck, it was with the calm precision of a master martial artist. His fist collided with the Ghost Spider's left sword, and the blade shivered violently before snapping in two. A guttural curse ripped from the Ghost Spider's throat as fragments of metal clattered to the deck. Its vicious expression flickered with rage. Wordlessly, it drew another sword, this one sheathed high in the creature's hair-like tendrils, and swung for Nethin. But Nethin met the new threat without hesitation. A second punch, delivered to the Ghost Spider's forearm, sent the sword flying clear across the deck. Bones and sinew gave way under the force of his blow, the crack echoing like a thunderclap. The creature's two weapons lay useless at its feet. Its arm dangled limply, nerves torn and nerves severed. The deck rocked beneath them, and for the briefest moment, silence reigned. Then, the Ghost Spider collapsed, its defeated form crumpling as every muscle and bone protested the assault. Around them, sailors exhaled as one, the tension bleeding out of the air. Nethin stood over the fallen foe, his chest heaving but unbowed. He had endured the Ghost Spider's dominion and emerged victorious. And as the wind whistled across the deck, carrying the faint promise of dawn, even the sea seemed to acknowledge that justice, at last, had been done. Nethin took another step forward, swung his arm in a violent arc, and with a thunderous crack of steel, every blade caught in the Ghost Spider's tangled hair shattered. He crushed the last fragments beneath his boot as he stepped onto the ship's deck. Major General Ghost Spider! The ranks of naval officers lining the rails recoiled in horror. Before them stood the infamous Rear Admiral, stripped of his deadly weapons and staring at Nethin in stunned disbelief. Yet in Nethin's gaze there was no triumph, no cruelty, only an almost chilling calm as he looked down on his immobile foe. "Rear Admiral," Nethin said quietly, "the way you judge and punish others is your business, but if you intend to pass sentence on me—" He paused, and then delivered the final blow. Crack! The sickening sound of bone snapping echoed across the silent deck. Not a single soul stirred. Chapter 44, The Navy Headquarters Trembles. From their distant vantage point, the crews on the two escort ships trained their binoculars on the warship where Nethin Rhodes and Major General Ghost Spider were locked in combat. Until a moment ago, the air had crackled with energy, sizzling bursts of force and thunderous impacts, but suddenly everything went silent. Is it over? Some wondered. Had Ghost Spider finally subdued Rhodes's dreaded ghost hand technique? A senior officer from the Western Sea Division leaned on the rail, cigar in hand, and scoffed under his breath. Major General Ghost Spider is the guardian of the Great Route. Rhodes stands no chance of stirring up any real trouble. His voice was measured, confident that the duel's outcome was already decided. But before his words had fully registered, a tremendous crack split the air. Far across the water, the besieged warship shuddered violently, as if seized by an unseen giant. Wooden boards snapped like kindling, sending splinters flying. The hull groaned and bucked under the assault of a force no one could explain. By the gods! What's happening over there? Alarm rippled through both fleets. Officers dropped their cigars, binoculars swung back toward the stricken vessel, and hearts pounded as they tried to fathom this shocking new turn of events. In that moment of stunned silence, everyone realized that this battle, far from being decided, was about to enter a whole new, far more dangerous phase. As the watch crews leaned in for a closer look, the enemy dreadnought's hull suddenly groaned as if in agony. A deep, splintering crack raced along its center. Then, boom, the entire ship twisted violently in two and snapped apart like a broken tree trunk. Gasps echoed across the decks of the surrounding fleet. Telescopes clicked into place. Officers stared in stunned silence. The great warship, carrying Major General Ghost Spider herself, had been destroyed in an instant. When the wreckage finally settled, the sea erupted in towering waves that radiated outward, washing over debris and sending shattered planks drifting like driftwood. And there, standing astride the ruined midship, was a lone figure, drenched in crimson. His boots sank into the splintered deck. His sword dripped blood. He looked up, his eyes glinting in the spray, a living embodiment of slaughter. That figure was none other than Ghost Hand Rhodes. A deathly hush fell over the fleet. The men and women aboard the remaining two cruisers exchanged looks of horror. If Rhodes could lay waste to a fully crewed dreadnought in mere seconds, then what had become of Major General Ghost Spider? Could it be? Captain Marlowe's breath caught in his throat. Fear flickered in his eyes as he shook his head in disbelief. Impossible. Major Admiral Ghost Spider of Navy Headquarters should have crushed any pirate in the Western Seas. And yet, here lay the shattered hull of his flagship, proof that his greatest warrior had fallen. Then, out of the smoke and debris, a blood-soaked figure sprang into view. He sprinted straight for the only two warships still afloat. "He's coming!" someone screamed. "Where is Ghost Spider? How could he lose to a single pirate?" Panic rippled through the Navy ranks as they frantically scanned the wreckage. There was no sign of the admiral. Instead, the pirate, Nethin, vaulted aboard one of the surviving vessels. Instinctively, the sailors raised their rifles and fired. Boom, boom, boom. Bullets tore through the air, but none even nicked Nethin. With each paced step, the deck groaned, planks splintering beneath him. Before the men could reload, the warped floorboards gave way, and Nethin vanished through a gaping hole into the ship's lower decks. Silence fell. No one moved. The name Nethin hung in the air like a warning. The pirate who had bested Ghost Spider now stood unchallenged deep within the Navy's own stronghold. Moments later, a tyrannical twisting force erupted from Nethin's position, radiating outward in every direction. It was as though the very heart of his ship had been struck by an invisible hammer. The deck planks buckled and rippled like storm-tossed waves. Crack! Snap! Under the sheer might of Nethin's power, the fourth warship collapsed in an instant, its hull splintering into a chaotic spray of timber and steel. "Retreat! Fall back!" The crew aboard the distant fifth warship, stunned by the sudden destruction of their sister vessel, snapped out of disbelief and erupted in panic. The ship's colonel, face pale and voice hoarse, barked the order as alarms blared and men scrambled. Amid the mangled wreckage of the shattered fourth ship, Nethin staggered across a tilted deck plank, chest heaving, sweat and seawater dripping from his brow. The brutal duel with the Ghost Spider had nearly exhausted him. Had he not tapped into that fearsome power of heightened sight and hearing at the 11th hour, even this decisive victory would have been a bitter, tragic defeat. Nethin's reserves were completely drained after he'd obliterated the third and fourth warships. He could barely stand. One well-aimed salvo from the fifth vessel would finish him. Yet he felt no fear. He'd already calculated the enemy's morale. With Major General Ghost Spider missing, and 4 ships reduced to wreckage, the crew of the 5th was teetering on the edge of panic. And by taking down the headquarters Major General Ghost Spider, Nethin had earned 40 talent proficiency points. He could funnel them all into his physique for a temporary surge of strength. Admittedly, the Major General had been more formidable than Nethin first assumed, but there would be no more underestimating him. Nethin turned his gaze toward the distant 5th warship, shook his head, and glanced down at the blood staining his armor. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he murmured, "Let's finish this." Nethin's body was anything but ordinary by now. Every inch of him was crusted in dried blood and scabbed wounds, but none still bled. After a tense moment, Robin guided the pirate ship through the shattered ruins, edging it alongside the broken coastline. As the vessel came to a stop, Nethin summoned the last of his strength, planted his feet firmly, and vaulted onto the deck. "Captain Nethin." Robin's breath caught as she saw the stains of dried blood on his tunic. "It's okay," Nethin said with a faint smile, lifting a hand to reassure her. "Just grab the med kit and clean these up." Relief flooded Robin's face when she realized the injuries were all superficial and already scabbing over. She knelt beside him, laid out the first aid supplies, soaked cotton in antiseptic, and methodically tended to each abrasion. High in the Navy headquarters fortress, the top-floor office of Admiral Akainu bore an imposing plaque, "Absolute Justice." Here, under that stern motto, the Admiral's iron will direct the Navy's every move. Admiral Akainu sat behind his desk, his Navy Justice cloak with golden epaulets draped over the chair. In one hand he held a report. Before him stood Lieutenant General Doberman, awaiting his judgment. "I'm pleased you handled those assignments without incident," Akainu began, his tone measured. Then he lifted his gaze, eyes locking onto Doberman's. "But what's going on in the West Sea?" Though his duties spanned the Grand Line and the New World, Akainu never lost sight of the 4 blues, including Shihai. At the mention of Shihai, Doberman's expression shifted. He bowed his head and answered quietly, "Sir, because you've been occupied, I postponed the formal report. My plan was to compile everything once the situation was fully resolved. I judged Shihai's troubles to be minor, nothing demanding immediate attention." Akainu snorted, leaning forward so that the light caught the severity in his eyes. "Minor?" The grand conference hall of the Navy's high command was quiet except for the soft rustle of documents. Fleet Admiral Akainu sat at the head of the long table, his expression as hard and unyielding as ever. Opposite him, Commander Doberman bowed deeply. "About Ghost Hand Roads," Doberman began in a low voice. "I know the government went to great lengths to sweep this up, nearly costing the Navy its reputation. A pirate from the West Sea may normally be beneath our notice, but any scandal that tarnishes the Navy is no small matter. This, and the embarrassment, is entirely my fault." He paused, pressing his palms together. "I dispatched Major General Ghost Spider to the West Sea. His orders were to locate Rhodes's exact position. A report arrived just a few days ago, confirming that we'd pinned down the Ghost Hand's whereabouts. That should have settled the matter." For the first time in the morning, the tension around Akainu's mouth eased. He picked up a fountain pen, scanned the bundle of reports Doberman had laid before him, then handed them back with clipped efficiency. Doberman bowed again, ready to withdraw, when the chamber doors crashed open. A Navy colonel burst in, sweat matting his uniform. "Report, report," he gasped. Every eye snapped to him. "The West Sea Fleet under Major General Ghost Spider." The colonel choked out the words, "engaged the Ghost Hand pirates in fierce combat. We lost 4 warships, and the Major General is unaccounted for." Silence slammed down on the room. The air went icy. Akainu's eyes narrowed to slits as the colonel trembled under their gaze. The crisis they'd tried to contain now threatened to engulf them all. Admiral Akainu's eyes snapped open, and he whirled to face the naval colonel before him. His voice, calm but ice-cold, made the air in the chamber grow oppressively hot. "What did you say?" The colonel went rigid, trembling so violently he could barely stand. Beside him, Captain Doberman's face drained of color. The dispatch clutched in his hands rattled as if caught in a storm. How could Major General Ghost Spider, their ace, have failed to subdue a single West Sea pirate? In fact, the so-called little fish they'd written off as insignificant had turned the tables in spectacular fashion, and the fallout was worse than anyone had dared imagine. News had just reached Navy headquarters that in April of the 11th year, in the waters off Shipwright Town in the West Sea, the pirate Rhodes had defeated Ghost Spider and sent 4 of our warships to the bottom. The revelation struck the room like a thunderbolt, leaving every man present reeling at the scale of the disaster. Chapter 45. The West Sea Erupts. 3 days have passed since Rear Admiral Ghost Spider, sent by Navy headquarters with a fleet drawn from every West Sea division, set out to crush the Ghost Hand pirates. The result was a catastrophic failure. In the chase, 4 Navy warships were sunk, and Admiral Ghost Spider's fate remains a mystery. By dawn, this devastating news had spread to every shore and port, sending shockwaves through the entire West Sea. In every harbor town, merchants, sailors, and dock workers gathered around harbormaster bulletin boards, rereading the startling reports. "This can't be real," murmured one veteran quartermaster, his eyes glued to the broadside. Even the admirals from headquarters couldn't handle those scoundrels. The article recounted how a carefully assembled armada was decisively outmaneuvered by the Ghost Hand pirates, an outcome more fit for legend than fact. For the residents of the West Sea, the Ghost Hand pirates were nothing more than a ragtag regional crew, certainly no match for the Navy's finest. Yet here lay the proof: 4 ships lost, an entire squadron routed, and the admiral himself vanished without a trace. Disbelief turned to alarm as everyone grappled with the reality that the West Sea was no longer safe. The ripples of this disaster reached beyond local waters. Pirate crews along the Grand Line swapped rumors over mugs of grog, their excitement barely contained. On one vessel of the 8 Treasures fleet, a stout ship painted midnight blue, a portly old captain in a green linen shirt spread the paper across his cabin table. His thick gray beard bristled as he tapped the headline. His bald head gleamed under the lantern light. "You see this, Garin," he rumbled to his first mate. "They've been bested, 4 warships gone, and that Ghost Spider, poof, vanished without so much as a cannon blast to show for it. Tell me the seas aren't getting fun." Meanwhile, in the hidden cove where the Ghost Hand pirates lay low, their young Lieutenant Nethin leaned forward, eyes sparkling with determination. He'd marked the locations of every sunken Navy vessel on his weathered chart and traced the routes they'd taken. The entire West Sea was in turmoil, and the tide was clearly turning in their favor. Chapter X. Flames Rising in the West Sea. Nethin, 12th pillar of the 8 Treasures Navy and commander of the Green Pepper Squadron, slammed the broadsheet onto the mahogany desk. The report was infuriating. Kaiyi's clumsy seamanship and inevitable demise at sea were bad enough, but murdering one of the next generation's pillars of the 8 Treasures Marine Corps? Unforgivable. His knuckles whitened as he ripped the newspaper in half. "Mark my words, kid," he growled, voice low and furious. "I'll find you, sooner or later." Far to the west, aboard a creaking pirate galleon, a wanted cutthroat with a 90 million bounty fingered the same headline. He squinted at the ink-smudged lines. He took down a Navy headquarters major general. Sounds like a new power is rising in the West Sea. In a dimly lit tavern on a windswept island, a one-eyed buccaneer leaned back on a barrel, rum in hand. He grinned at the newsprint. "Major General Ghost Spider. He came after me once and wound up 6 feet under out here. The so-called Great Rote will shift soon enough." He chuckled, swirling the last drop of rum in his glass. "But the Great Rote doesn't even run through the West Sea. Such a high-profile debut might stir more trouble than opportunity. And everyone's watching now." A hush fell over the bar as the pirate tapped the paper against his fingers. The West Sea had always been a backwater, but with Nethin's vow echoing across its waves, that was about to change. Pirate crews almost invariably turn on one another. There's only one secret treasure worth claiming, and only one pirate king can rule the waves. To seize that crown, every rival must be beaten. 2 days remained before Nethin's new ship would be ready to set sail, and in the cramped cabin of his old vessel, he trained without pause. He stood amid 6 heavy sandbags, eyes closed, knuckles white as he pounded them in a relentless rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. His recent duel with the Ghost Spider had awakened something in him, a fierce, domineering aura that flared up in the heat of battle. But as powerful as that surge felt, it was raw and untamed. Nathan knew well that true mastery, even of one's own strength, comes only through relentless practice. He needed countless more strikes, countless more battles, if he hoped to harden and control that hidden power. Sight and sound itself had sharpened in that fight, but heightened senses, too, must be honed and disciplined before they can be relied upon. As the minutes stretched on, Nathan's feet began to shift. He no longer remained rooted in place, but flowed around the bags, weaving between them, striking at new angles. Each blow tested his balance, each pivot refined his stance. Sweat dripped into his eyes, yet he welcomed the sting. It reminded him that in 2 days he would stand at the helm of a formidable vessel. And come that moment, he would need every ounce of strength, skill, and unwavering will if he was to claim the crown of the sea. Nathan closed his eyes as he weaved through the forest of swinging sandbags. His fists struck with pinpoint accuracy, and he slipped sideways to evade the rest. Memories of his previous fight with the ghost spider surfaced. Then, his sluggish reflexes had left him at a constant disadvantage. No matter how wildly the creature attacked, he couldn't match its speed. That was before. After slaying the ghost spider, he'd earned 40 talent proficiency points and devoted every one to agility enhancement. Now, with a full 100 points invested, he'd crossed into the advanced tier. His speed and reaction time had nearly doubled. If he ever faced the ghost spider again, even without calling on any domineering techniques, he wouldn't need to struggle for every inch of the fight. He would win. Nathan's agility enhancement didn't just boost his speed and reflexes, it sharpened his senses and perception, making it far easier for him to master his domineering aura. With his heightened awareness, he could pinpoint the aura's presence and, during training, focus on controlling it consciously rather than letting it surge uncontrollably in the heat of battle. Boom, boom. 12 sandbags of varying sizes swung at him from every angle. Thanks to his keen eyes and ears, Nathan anticipated each attack. He weaved between the ropes, sidestepped incoming bags, and struck every one dead center with his fists. Still, willing the aura to respond on command remained challenging. He continued darting, dodging, and punching, with every strike draining a little more from his spirit. Finally, when he could no longer sense another sandbag's motion, he brought his arms to his sides and exhaled, sweat and satisfaction mingling as he surveyed the silent, swaying bags around him. Mastering the color domination technique didn't cost much physical energy, but it drained his spirit severely. Even Captain Nathan could only train in short, staggered sessions. Over the past 3 days, however, his own experiments, guided by the key insights he jotted down in his knowledge journal, had gradually revealed the pathway to full control. All that remained was steadfast practice. Nathan stepped out of the training room and headed back to his quarters, planning to grab a drink and rest. Just then, Robin rounded the hallway corner, clutching a freshly printed newspaper. "Captain Nathan, you're on the front page again," she announced. He took the broadsheet from her and skimmed the article. As usual, the government's official bulletin was filled with accusations of heinous crimes, trial schedules, and other grandiloquent nonsense. Shaking his head, he set the paper aside and reached beneath it for another document, a new bounty poster. His lips curved into a smile as he read the figure aloud, 92 million Bailey. At last, his own bounty rivaled those of his crew. Nico Robin's bounty had just climbed to 79 mil, lionberries, already surpassing Rhodes's former total, and she was now firmly locked into second place. Robin let out a soft chuckle. The captain's bounty will overtake mine soon enough. Her latest jump, to a colossal 92 million, sent shockwaves rippling through every pirate-hunting crew in the West Blue. With the Devil Child, Nico Robin aboard, the Ghost Hand Pirates' combined bounties now stood at an astonishing 171 million berries. Such staggering figures bred envy in the hearts of countless hunters and rival pirates alike, yet not one dared to challenge them. After all, the Navy had dispatched an admiral with a full 5-ship squadron to take down Rhodes's crew, and Rhodes had utterly annihilated them. That crushing defeat still loomed over the West Blue like an immovable mountain, smothering any thoughts of attack. Chapter 46. Ghosts. 3 days later, early in the morning, Nathan was back in the training hall, perfecting his newly acquired arrogance technique. Each strike and breath brought him closer to unraveling its final secret. He could almost feel the power thrumming at his fingertips. All around him, sandbag dummies swayed from his blows, a relentless rhythm of impact and counter-impact. Just as he prepared for one last decisive push, Robin slipped in through the doorway. "You've got to see this," she said, excitement in her voice. "The new ship's finished." Nethin wiped the sweat from his brow, tossed the towel aside, and followed her out. They stepped over scattered training gear and machines, then emerged onto the north shore of Boatwork Island. The canals glinted in the dawn light as they wove through the familiar workshops and lumberyards. At the western bank, the scene was a testament to the craftsman's urgency. Piles of offcuts, metal shavings, and coiled ropes were strewn everywhere, the detritus of a ship built in just 7 days. Pushing past the debris, Nethin finally caught sight of the vessel. 40 meters of gleaming hull, a proud prow rising from the water, and 2 sturdy masts standing ready to bear sail. The ship floated gracefully in its berth, every plank and joint immaculate. Robin laid a hand on his shoulder. "What do you think?" Nethin inhaled deeply, breathing in the scent of freshly cut wood and sea salt. He let his eyes roam over the craftsmanship, each weld, each knot, each varnished board flawless. "She's perfect," he said, smiling, but as he stepped closer, a sudden chill brushed his spine. The morning air felt heavier here, as if unseen eyes watched from the shadowed corners of the dock. Nethin shook off the feeling and forced a steadying breath. Yet in the hush that followed, he could have sworn he heard faint whispers carried on the breeze, ghosts of the shipwrights who'd worked through the night, or something else entirely. The entire vessel is painted in dark hues. Its hull is long and streamlined, the deckhouse barely rising above it, more arrow than ship. At a glance, you know this craft was built for one thing: speed. On the starboard side, old Fitz was busy with his final measurements. When he spotted Nethin and Robin approaching, he wiped the mud and sweat from his forehead, beamed, and strode over to greet them. Taking Nethin's hand in a firm shake, he announced proudly, "I christen her the Ghost Shadow." As the master shipwright who designed every plank and spar, Fitz alone reserved the right to name her. He led them down the length of the hull, sweeping one arm theatrically. "I lowered the freeboard to cut wind resistance, rigged a vertical jib for better handling, and built this hull out of solid silverwood, stronger, grain for grain, than ordinary steel. I can't promise she'll tame every sea, but among sailing ships, nothing will outrun her." He patted his chest swelling with pride. Nethin and Robin exchanged impressed glances, already feeling the thrill of the Ghost Shadow's hidden power beneath their feet. Nethin stood back and admired his creation, the Ghost Shadow. He'd conceived the design years ago, but only now, thanks to enough funding and a perfectly crafted keel trunk, had the ship taken shape. Apart from vessels with exotic engines, no other sailing ship he'd ever known could match the Ghost Shadow's speed. It was breathtaking. Robin tilted his head up, admiration shining in his eyes. Beside him, Captain Rhodes couldn't hide his grin. Firepower didn't interest Rhodes. He wanted unrivaled speed anchored by solid strength and durability. Commanding the world's fastest sailboat was an honor he relished. Old Fitz waved his cane with a chuckle. "Ah, but let's give credit where it's due. Without that treasure tree timber you secured from Adam, Nethin, this hull wouldn't survive the stresses of your design. And without those tens of millions of Baileys, you couldn't have bought enough silverwood to build it. Not to mention..." He paused, glancing meaningfully at Rob. After a moment, he continued, "I trust you'll take Robin aboard, and keep him well clear of any government or naval meddling." Nethin met Fitz's steady gaze and nodded. "Robin is the only crewman I've approved. I'll be fully responsible for everyone I bring on board." Old Fitz simply stared back, his approval unspoken but unmistakable. Nethin trusted Fitz's judgment. There was no hint of deceit in the older man's eyes, so he allowed himself a broad grin. "All right," he said. "Let's see what's up there." Fitz led Nethin and Robin up onto the ship's deck. With so few superstructures, the hull's uppermost level sprawled almost flush with the sea, wide and uncluttered, so clean and open it could serve as a ballroom floor. A light breeze rippled over the polished wood, and for a moment, Nethin imagined a waltz under the stars. When Fitz was satisfied, he ushered them back inside to the mid-level superstructure, which housed the main living quarters. At its heart lay a grand salon. Low sofas and elegant counters were arranged much like a dance hall's seating, and soft lantern light shimmered off brass fixtures overhead. To one side, a spacious training room, a hybrid of golden oak, denser and stronger than immersed silverwood and specially forged steel, stood ready to withstand the hardest blows. Elsewhere, along the corridor were private studies and alcoves. Though the shelves held only a modest collection of volumes, Robin's eyes shone with delight at each modest tome. Below them, the lowest deck served as a vast cargo hold. Crates, barrels, and supplies of every description were stowed neatly, their contents promising food, tools, or secret wares for distant ports. As they finished the tour, Nethin felt a flicker of excitement. This vessel, sleek, spacious, and well-appointed, was more than he'd ever dreamed to travel on, and it was all theirs, at least for the voyage ahead. Nethin stepped back to admire the hull. There weren't many gun ports, only 8 in total on both sides, so it was clear that Rhodes had been too lazy to fit every cannon. Having explored every cabin and inspected the decks, the three of them climbed back up to the main deck. Nethin looked down with a satisfied grin and declared, "Almost perfect. Ha! Haven't built a ship in years, but it feels like riding a bike." Old Fitz chuckled in response, nodding at Nethin's praise. Nethin took a couple more paces, then turned to his old friend. "But you know," he said, "this almost perfect ship still lacks one crucial element, a helmsman. Without someone at the wheel, it's all for nothing." Old Fitz had clearly anticipated the remark. He pulled a weathered jug from beneath his coat, took a long pull of wine, and then strolled to the railing. Staring out at the endless sea, he sighed. "And having an old man like me at the helm would be even worse. I never signed on with pirates in my youth, and I'm not about to start now. The sea is yours, you young folk. Steer her true." Nethin watched the old sailor straighten up, a sudden spark flickering in his cloudy eyes. "I only ask one favor," he said quietly. "Take this ship and spirit Olvia's children away from the Navy's clutches." Nethin nodded without surprise. Fitz had built every vessel that ever flew Red Hair Shanks's flag, yet he himself had never set foot aboard one. The only person even remotely likely to man a Shanks ship was Robin, and even that seemed a stretch. A shame, really. Nethin gave a curt shake of his head, silently withdrawing his invitation. Fitz offered Nethin and Robin a faint, knowing smile, then turned and shuffled down the gangplank, his steps uneven but determined. As he disappeared, Nethin gazed out across the rolling blue, eyes narrowing for a moment. He pivoted to Robin. "With a new ship under our command," he said, "we'll need fresh hands at the oars. But before that, I need 2 pieces of information. First, the last known trail of the Twin Swords pirates. Bounty, 59 million berry, rumored to be somewhere in the West Sea. And second, the current whereabouts of the Devil Sheriff, Lafitte." These were to be his final assignments in the West Sea before he set sail for the Grand Line. The Twin Swords had long been the quarry Nethin intended to hunt. Now, with a ship to call his own and a crew still to assemble, nothing would stand in his way. The Devil Sheriff Lafitte had once served as the Blackbeard pirate's navigator in the original tale. Now that everything was about to be turned upside down, inviting an evil clown figure like him aboard would certainly ignite some excitement. Rhodes had long been on the lookout for a skilled navigator. He was growing weary of acting as both captain and navigator himself. Between his drills, he devoted hours each day to studying weather patterns and redrawing sea charts. Nami was still too young and stationed far off in the East Blue, while Lafitte, rumored to be prowling the West Blue, presented an ideal choice. The only question was how to bring him into their fold. Their rival had already managed to board the ship, but Nethin refused to rush into anything without a clear plan. First, he needed to see for himself who this Lafitte really was. Chapter 47. Double Swords and the Devil Sheriff. The shipyard buzzed with activity in the early morning light. The newly built vessel, its hull gleaming under the sun, lay only a short distance from the shoreline. Old Fitz, having overseen every stage of construction, now turned to face his crew of boatmen. "All right," he barked. "Hoist the lines. Let's get her to the water." Thick hemp ropes were passed down the makeshift gangway, and a dozen men strained against their anchor points. One end of each rope was secured to the bow, the other was fastened to sturdy posts inland. At Fitz's signal, They pulled as one, grunting, sweating, the keel inching forward over the sandy ground. Rhodes stood off to one side, arms folded, watching skeptically. Robin hovered nearby, her curiosity piqued by every groan and shift of the great ship. Neither of them intervened. This was standard procedure, after all, until Nithin stepped forward. He moved to the stern, where the planks arched gracefully toward the water. With a single hand pressed flat against the smooth timber, he braced his feet and leaned in. A soft rumble rolled through the crowd as the ship, which had resisted a dozen strong backs, slid effortlessly toward the shore. The boatmen paused mid-pull, ropes slackening as they stared. Then the hull picked up speed, gliding over the wet sand like a phantom. Shouts of astonishment rose over the clatter of wood on shell. "What on earth? He's pushing it by himself!" For a moment, no one moved. The sea wind whipped at their faces as they turned to glimpse the figure at the stern, barely straining yet more powerful than any ox or mule. Robin gasped. Rhodes shook his head in disbelief. Old Fitz, eyes wide, even let out a low whistle. "That boy," he muttered, "he's no ordinary lad. He's a giant in human guise." As the prow kissed the surf and the waves caressed the planks, the crowd finally found its voice. Ropes were secured to the ship's rings, long poles were dropped for guidance, and the men rushed forward, eager to finish the launch. But all eyes remained on Nithin, the young man who had moved a ship with nothing but a single, steady push, an impossible feat that marked him, once again, as a force beyond normal measure. The recent skirmish off the North Shore was still the talk of every sailor and dockhand, though few knew the exact details. Most simply assumed a band of pirates had squared off with the Navy and won. Now, under a slate-gray sky, Nithin leaned forward against the stern, muscles straining as he shoved the boat off the ramp. With a sudden thrust, the hull shot forward, slicing through the chilly water. Once afloat, Old Fitz clambered aboard to inspect the hull. He peered into the bilge, tapped along the planks, satisfied there were no leaks, then clambered back ashore. On the dock, porters and the remaining hands from the Rhodes freighter were busily stowing provisions, barrels of fresh water, crates of salted meat, sacks of grain, and the sundry gear salvaged from the old ship. By noon, every last bale and barrel was secure. A hush fell over the harbor as the sails of the Ghost Shadow caught the wind. Old Fitz stood at the water's edge, his weathered face half hidden by the rising spray. He raised a hand in farewell. "Bon voyage," he called, his voice thick with unshed pride. A clear light flickered in his murky eyes. Proof, he thought, that despite his aching bones and silvering hair, this would be the final ship he ever sent to sea. Nithin glanced back at him and offered a small, confident smile. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay adventure and danger in equal measure, and he couldn't wait to meet it. Nithin watched the dock shrink behind him as the Ghost Shadow slipped away from the pier. He turned to face the open sea, its horizon stretching endlessly before him. He let out a low laugh. "So this is it, the world's fastest sailing ship. World government, Navy, you've always treated me like I was just another loose end to be tied up. Are you ready for me now?" Half a month later, on the West Sea, Arn cliffs of a remote island in the West Sea, Nico Robin peered down at the Ghost Shadow bobbing gently below. With a calm smile, she raised her arms, and as if by magic, dozens of slender limbs sprouted and fanned out like wings. She glided off the cliff, her dark hair trailing behind her in the wind. Moments later, Robin touched down lightly on the deck, her extra limbs folding seamlessly against her body. She brushed imaginary dust from her skirt and looked up to see Nithin lounging in a chair beside a small table. He had been nursing cramped legs, but now he relaxed back into the cushions, relief washing over his face. "Thanks to you, we walked away with every piece of information we needed," he said, a genuine grin breaking across his features. "We got lucky." Robin's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Rewards go to those who deliver." Nithin sat up straighter, chuckling. "Oh, and what reward do you have in mind?" "I'll restock every bookshelf in the ship's library," she replied lightly, "next time we dock." Rhodes snapped his fingers, and Robin stepped forward. After offering a brief nod of thanks to the captain, Robin turned to Nithin, his face serious. "About the Twin Swords pirates," Robin began. "Just yesterday, in the Suchuart Sea, they dealt a stunning blow to the Navy's T6 branch fleet." Nithin's eyes flashed with interest. They must be formidable to defeat a branch-based fleet in the Western Sea. Not many pirate crews boast bounties over 30 million, and I've personally taken down most of them. I've even winnowed out dozens with bounties above 20 million. I thought the pirates were on their last legs. But if the twin swords have beaten the Navy, they'll only embolden every scoundrel along these routes. Robin shook his head. It's more than brute strength. In just over 3 years, the Twin Swords pirates have risen from obscurity to become one of the most feared forces in the Western Sea, and when they shattered the naval fleet, they uncovered something critical. Nethin leaned forward. What did they find? Robin's eyes narrowed as she spoke. You know the so-called captain of the Shuangjian pirates, the one with a 59 million Bailey bounty? He isn't the real leader. Nethin's curiosity flared. Robin took a steadying breath. Behind the scenes is the former captain of the Ghost Sword pirates from the Grand Line, Captain Ghost Sword himself. Ghost Sword? Nethin repeated, leaning forward. 3 years ago, the Navy launched a full-scale ambush on the Grand Line and supposedly wiped out the Ghost Sword pirates, Robin continued. Official reports claimed the crew was destroyed, but Ghost Sword escaped. He slipped back to the West Sea, remained in the shadows, and single-handedly founded the Shuangjian pirates. His true bounty now stands at 98 million Bailey. She fixed Nethin with a serious look. We need to reconsider our plan. We thought we were going after a middling pirate crew, but if their real captain is Ghost Sword, we'd be up against one of the most dangerous men on the seas. Nethin's mind raced. He'd been eager to clash with the Shuangjian pirates, but facing Ghost Sword himself was an entirely different threat. Nethin leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. Pirates. Their schemes and strength should never be underestimated, but our plan remains on track, he chuckled quietly. If you let one defeated fleet force you to change course, how will you ever conquer the Grand Line? Robin exchanged a quick glance with him. He knew better than to argue. Nethin's decisions were as unshakable as his reputation. Still, Robin allowed himself a small, knowing smile. There's more, he said. We've received fresh intelligence on that so-called Devil Sheriff Lafitte. He was once a royal security officer, until his brutality got him expelled. Interestingly, he's operating in the same waters as the Shuangjian pirates. Nethin rose to his feet and spread a sea chart across the table. Perfect, he said, his voice calm and decisive. We'll handle both threats at once. Which H sector are they in? Robin pointed to a shaded area on the chart, the Watergold Seas. Nethin's eyes followed Robin's finger. He reached for his compass, confirmed their heading, then tapped the map with conviction. The distance isn't great. At the Ghost's top speed, we can be there in 5 days. He straightened, clapped his hands once, and the room seemed to vibrate with his resolve. All right, he commanded. Set the helm. Hoist the sails. Full speed ahead for the Watergold Seas. Chapter 48, Arrival. Why does the West Sea keep serving up nothing but headaches? Lieutenant General Doberman growled, thumping a fresh report onto his desk. His office at Navy headquarters was unnervingly quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of papers as his aide presented the latest dispatch. Barely 2 weeks had passed since the disastrous Ghost Hand Roads affair, an incident that had earned him Admiral Akainu's severe rebuke and nearly cost him his command. He'd barely caught his breath when this new crisis landed in his lap. According to the report, the notorious Ghost Sword pirates had resurfaced, this time targeting the G8 branch base. Worse yet, in their eagerness to prove themselves, the base's officers had captured an innocent double swordsman instead of the real pirate captain. He'd been paraded before the fleet as Captain Ghost Sword, a sham designed to curry military merit. Doberman's eyes blazed with anger. They had driven the pirates off, yes, but they'd failed at the crucial task, securing the real threat. Now an ordinary sailor paid the price for someone else's blunder, while the true villain roamed free. With a scowl, Doberman dismissed his aide. At most, he muttered, we'll strip them of their undeserved honors and dock their merits. But we cannot, or will not, halt operations for a full inquiry. He rose from his chair. Prepare the fleet. If the Ghost Sword pirates want to fight, we'll give them one, on our terms. As the lieutenant general strode from his office, the wheels of war began to turn once more in the troubled waters of the West Sea. Lieutenant General Doberman, what do you suggest? the Major General overseeing the West Sea asked, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. Unless we have the Great Rote's base captain lead the operation, we simply can't contain the Ghost Hand pirates, and dealing with the Double Sword pirates on top of that, it's nearly impossible. Doberman pressed his fingertips to his forehead, brow furrowed. He knew they couldn't spare the Great Rote's lieutenant general. Reassigning him to the West Sea would disrupt the entire troop deployment, and the other commanders would never consent. If it were only one pirate fleet, we might manage, he muttered. But facing two at once, this West Sea has turned out to be far more problematic than anyone predicted. Just then, another major general leaned in, speaking in a low voice. Sir, there's something else. After the Ghost Hand pirates commissioned that new ship at Shipwork Town, their recent plotted course has consistently matched the Double Sword pirates' trajectory. It looks as if the two crews are deliberately coordinating. Doberman's tired eyes flicked up. Coordinating? He exchanged a look with his staff. This changes everything. General Doberman stiffened. Everywhere Nethin went, whether Navy stronghold or pirate lair, destruction followed in his wake. The mere thought that the Ghost Hand pirates might cross paths with the Shuangjian pirates sent a ripple of unease through him. If the two factions clashed, it would be a slaughter on both sides, and perhaps an opportunity. Alert the nearest West Sea detachment, he ordered, voice low but urgent. Keep them on standby, and monitor Nethin's movements at all times. Under no circumstances are they to engage without direct orders. Yes, sir. The Major General saluted crisply and withdrew. Ghost Shadow Training Room. More than a dozen heavy sandbags, each hung at a different height, swung gently in the dim light. Nethin stood motionless at the center, eyes closed. Despite the darkness around him, he seemed to perceive every shift in the air, and as each sandbag swung toward him, he slipped aside with uncanny precision. It had been just over 2 weeks since Ghost Shadow's inception, and in that time, Nethin had mastered both the overbearing and domineering techniques. On his talent interface, those two skill branches now glowed solid gold, confirming they were fully activated. Nethin darted among the 10 sandbags as though they were nothing more than step 4 and markers on a training course. Bullets slammed into the canvas around him in a deafening hail, yet he moved with unfazed confidence, slipping, ducking, and advancing as if each round were little more than raindrops. Between these drills, he never neglected his strength workouts, pushing his body to its limits. Day by day, his muscles grew harder, his reflexes sharper, and he carried himself with an ever more imposing air. But it wasn't just his physical power that improved. Nethin's Devil Fruit ability, the so-called Twisted Fruit, had begun to expand its range. In theory, the fruit's power could branch out along countless paths, much like a talent tree in a game system. In practice, however, true mastery proved elusive. Eager to unlock new horizons, Nethin attempted to distort gravity itself before the system had granted him the necessary advancements. The effort ended in failure. His twisting force couldn't even graze the intangible pull of gravity. It became painfully clear that warping solid matter and bending ethereal forces were worlds apart. Without the support of the talent system's proper upgrades, crossing that divide might forever remain beyond his reach. Even the legendary Whitebeard couldn't smash through the fabric of space and time, only fracture the air around him. If someone of his power could not claim dominion over reality itself, then Nethin understood just how steep his path still lay ahead. Yet, rather than discouraging him, the challenge only fueled his resolve. He would sharpen body and fruit alike until there was no force left that he could not twist to his will. Nethin shifted his focus from gravitational distortion to sound, leaning forward so the noise wraiths he'd summoned wavered and blurred. Even so, sound remained marginally easier to trace than gravity, just barely. Satisfied the phantoms were thoroughly muddled, he moved on to his next exercise. First, he spent several minutes working the swinging sandbag in the center of the chamber, his form precise and economical. When he'd had enough of that, he strode to a far corner, loaded several massive weights onto his shoulders, and settled into a series of push-ups and squats. He'd once considered using the seabed stones as makeshift gym equipment, but the last time he'd shattered those stones, he'd forgotten to collect the cores and projectiles. Hunting replacements through the underground black markets on multiple islands had turned into a dead end. Nobody could, or would, sell them. Undeterred, Nathan pressed on. His chest was bare, beads of sweat forming and dripping onto the cold, hard floor as he pumped and rose, again and again. The weights he carried were fashioned from a rare mineral unique to this realm. Its tensile strength was only average, but its density far exceeded that of steel. A tiny fragment of it commanded a price equal to a substantial ingot of ordinary metal. By the time he finished, his muscles burned, his breath came hard, and every bead of sweat felt earned. Yet Nathan welcomed the ache. It was proof of progress, and a reminder that in his world, mastering both sound and strength would be the key to surviving whatever lay ahead. Nathan hefted the heavy pack onto his shoulders and began his regimen, counting silently as he pushed himself through set after grueling set. 131, 132. Half an hour later, he finally hit 1,000 push-ups. He rose, drenched in sweat, and gulped down several mouthfuls of water. After a 10-minute rest, he dropped into position for his next exercise, 1,000 deep squats. His training never compromised. One discipline, 1,000 repetitions. By the time he reached the final squat, even his well-forged body was heaving. After a brief respite, he rewarded himself with a cool shower and ended his session. Stepping out onto the ship's upper deck, Nathan found Robin seated at a small table, absorbed in a leather-bound tome. The crew scurried about, polishing railings and securing ropes with efficient precision. Ahead stretched the glittering pans of the water-gold sea, just under a day's sail to their destination. Nathan laid a brass compass and a folded chart on the table. He adjusted the compass needle, traced his finger along the plotted course, and nodded to himself. Looking up at Robin, he asked, "What's the situation on the island from your side?" Nathan leaned over the sea chart spread across the deck and traced the scattered cluster of islands with his finger. "The Watergold Sea," he said, eyes sharp, "is a lawless expanse, 21 islands in total. 1 large island, 6 mid-sized ones, and 14 little outposts. No sovereign nation claims these waters. It's pure chaos." Robin stood beside him, flipping through the notes he'd compiled. "I've cataloged everything we know so far," he said, ticking off points on his parchment. "Currents, hidden shoals, common smuggling routes, along with rumors of underground factions that vie for control here." He drew a quick circle around the biggest isle. "This should be our primary interest." Nathan nodded and compared Robin's data with the chart. His fingers skipped over a tiny speck. "We can ignore that lonely rock to starboard," he said, pointing to a small island with only a single village. "It's not worth our time. Instead, we head for this one." He tapped a mid-size island behind them, where the hidden bases of several pirate crews are said to lie. "In a place like this, vigilance is our best ally, and intelligence our greatest weapon." Robin packed away his notes with a grin. 2 days at sea, then we drop anchor at the designated cove. I'm ready." 48 hours later, the ghost shadow slipped into a narrow inlet on the windward side of the island and dropped anchor in the shadow of a sheer cliff. The crew worked efficiently, lowering the longboat and securing equipment. When they were ready, Nathan and Robin climbed into the rowboat and slipped ashore under the pale moonlight. They pressed close to the craggy rock face and made their way inland, guided by Robin's lantern. Footsteps and hushed voices soon carried to their ears. They ducked behind a thicket of tropical shrubs and spied a makeshift encampment where a dozen wiry figures gathered around a flickering fire. "These must be the Shuangjian pirates," Robin murmured, pointing to 2 swords crossed at the camp's entrance, a familiar emblem rumored to belong to that notorious band. "Their leader's here, but I don't see Devlin Lafitte." Nathan studied the scene. They move quickly. If Lafitte is here, he's keeping a low profile. He crouched and peered closer. "Still, we've confirmed the pirates' base of operations. That's good progress. We'll gather what we can tonight and report back, then plan our next move to flush out Lafitte himself." Robin nodded. "The Devil Sheriff may be elusive," he said, "but we're closing in." Nathan allowed himself a satisfied smile. The shadows around them were deep and the night was thick with danger, but for the first time they held the advantage of solid information. And in the lawless waters of the Watergold Sea, that could very well mean the difference between life and death. Chapter 49. The Water Gold Sea takes its name from its two principal islands, Water and Gold. Of the pair, Galder Island is the largest, vast enough to sustain an entire nation, while Water Island ranks a close second, straddling the line between medium and large landmass. Nathan and Robin set foot on Water Island's grimy streets beneath a sky smeared with oil-gray clouds. The district exuded a palpable tension. Passers-by glanced around like cornered animals, and beggars huddled in alleys with eyes sharp enough to draw blood. It was pure chaos, no order, no mercy, far removed from the more civilized flower country. Rumor had it that several West Sea underworld factions vied for dominance here. The Capone family had once been among the strongest, but after suffering a decisive defeat at Nathan's hands, they'd retreated and abandoned their claims. As the two companions rounded a crumbling brick corner, a single gunshot rang out, sharp, unexpected. Instantly, every head on the street snapped toward the sound. A lanky figure stood only steps ahead, his pistol still smoking. At his feet lay a burly man, bleeding into the cracked pavement. Robin's hand went to her holster. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Neither spoke as the shooter let out a low, contemptuous snarl. In that instant, the undercurrent of fear shifted to pure, electrified menace. Here on Water Island, danger wasn't whispered, it was proclaimed in bullets and blood, and Nathan intended to make sure he was the one doing the proclaiming. Nathan stepped into the dimly lit district, the clamor of shouting voices and clattering crates washing over him. He turned his head, listening to the din for a moment. This truly was a chaotic place. "I wouldn't expect anything less," he murmured. At his side, Robin offered no reaction. The two of them had spent plenty of time in the island's underbelly. Sights, or sounds, like these no longer fazed them. After winding through narrow alleys, they spilled out onto a crowded thoroughfare, lanterns swinging overhead and merchants hawking exotic wares. Nathan surveyed the crowd. "Let's split up," he suggested. "Gather what you can, then meet me back here in 30 minutes. Robin tipped the brim of her hat and gave a curt nod. Understood. Though she practiced rarely, Robin had grown more than competent with her devil fruit power under Nathan's tutelage. Today, she could handle bounty hunters of 20 to 30 million without breaking a sweat, and her ability rendered standard anti-devil fruit tactics useless. They went their separate ways. Nathan slipped through a side street until he spotted a small, rickety pub tucked beneath a flickering lantern. He pushed open the door and ducked inside. A haze of smoke and laughter greeted him. He made his way to the bar and dropped a few coins on the counter. The barkeep, a burly fellow with a scar running down one cheek, leaned in. Nathan ordered a glass of strong red wine, then tilted his head. "I heard the Twin Blade Pirates showed up in town recently. Can you tell me anything about that?" The bartender's eyes darted to the windows, then back to Nathan. He lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Shh! You didn't hear it from me, but yeah, the Twin Blades have been seen near the docks. Word is they're recruiting, offering hazard pay to anyone brave enough to join." Nathan lifted an eyebrow. "Recruiting, huh?" He took a slow sip of his wine, letting the information settle. Somewhere in this tangle of rumor and half-truths lay the clue he needed. He slipped a few more coins across the bar and straightened. "Thanks for the tip." With that, Nathan blended back into the shadows of the tavern, ready to follow this new lead, wherever it might take him. Nathan stepped up to the bar. Behind the counter stood a tavern girl whose delicate features and bright eyes reminded him of the fabled beauty Robin. At his question, she froze, setting down the wine jug with a soft clatter. "What exactly do you want to know?" she whispered, glancing around as if she expected someone eavesdropping. Nathan offered D2 gold coins. "I just want information. You look like you might have some." The girl's eyes went wide. 2 gold for a single glass of wine? You're generous." She slid the coins into her apron without a second thought. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush. "They arrived here 2 days ago. When they left, they slaughtered everyone they encountered, dozens of bodies, scattered all over the place. They didn't spare a soul." She paused, watching Nathan's expression beneath the fur-trimmed hat that shadowed half his face. "Word is, they're hiring fighters now, gathering recruits down by the West Bank. You need either coin or muscle to join. I take it you won't be signing up?" Nethin nodded slowly. Thank you, he said quietly, straightening his hat and turning away before she could answer. Nethin took a measured sip of wine, set his glass back on the table, and rose. He lifted his chin, offering the tavern's hostess a cool smile. As for joining them, that's a service they can afford elsewhere. With that, he turned and walked out into the night. The innkeeper watched his retreating figure, eyes widening in disbelief. Only when he disappeared into the street did she seem to remember herself. She snatched the stack of wanted posters from the sideboard, rifled through them, and stopped dead at one. Staring at the face and the astronomical bounty, she let out a soft gasp. 92 million Bailey. Ghost Hand Roads. In just 2 days, the West Sea had been swept by a gale powerful enough to elevate its two most feared pirate crews, the Ghost Hand Pirates and the Twin Swords Pirates, into a head-to-head rivalry that threatened to shake the entire region. Earlier, Nethin had arrived at this very tavern, well ahead of schedule. He waited patiently until Robin emerged from the shadows and slipped to his side. In a hushed tone, she reported, "The Twin Swords Pirates have been recruiting crew and are gathering a fleet off the west coast. Rumors have been swirling that the Devil Sheriff Lafitte has shown up in town over the past few days." Nethin glanced at Robin, surprise flickering in his eyes. After a brief pause, he said, "Perfect timing. Anyone with a taste for trouble won't turn down the chance to see Ghost Hand Nethin go up against the Double Sword Pirates. Let's head straight to the West Bank." Robin gave a quick nod. She'd been thinking the same thing. With a snap of his fingers, Nethin tipped the round cap on his head, flipping its brim from front to back. He straightened his shoulders and strode forward. The street was nearly deserted, its atmosphere heavy and oppressive. Almost everyone who remained stared at them, 2-3 pairs of eyes fixed on the strangers in their odd garb. Sensing those stares, Nethin met their gaze, silently counting the watchers. Then came the soft gasps echoing from dark doorways and alleyways. "Is that Ghost Hand Nethin? It really is him." In an instant, the entire street seemed to shift. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the hush settled over the avenue as every head turned toward Nethin and Robin. The game, it seemed, was already on. Nethin and Robin strode forward, and an eerie silence fell over the crowd. No one dared block their path, lest they invite disaster. Tales of Ghost Hand Roads' recent sweep through the West Sea had spread like wildfire, eclipsing even the legend of Ghost Sword, the Shuangjian pirates' long-hidden captain. Merchants and sailors alike hurried to step aside, unwilling to tempt fate. Unfazed, Nethin guided Robin across the quay and on toward the notorious West Bank. Whispers followed in their wake. They're heading right into the Shuangjian pirates' territory. Everybody knew the West Bank was the crew's recruitment ground for fearsome fighters. Yet no one truly believed Ghost Hand Rhodes would enlist under their black flag. His reputation was far bloodier. He wasn't a pirate lord, but a hunter of the powerful, systematically eradicating wave after wave of West Sea marauders with bounties of 20 to 30 million. Each time Nifel, another swaggering challenger, rose only to meet the same fate. Now, as Nethin and Robin approached the pirate enclave, speculation churned through every tavern and alley. What grim purpose drove the dreaded Ghost Hand to the doorstep of his sworn enemies? Now that Ghost Hand Nethin is sailing for the West Bank to take on the Twin Swords Pirates, everyone's abuzz. Ghost Hand Nethin's actually going to attack the Twin Swords Pirates? That's huge, murmured onlookers, eyes fixed on his departing ship. If they clash, who knows who'll win? One of them just killed a Navy headquarters admiral, while the other has at least braved the Grand Line. "I give the edge to Ghost Hand," one man whispered. "He slaughtered a headquarters admiral not long ago, whereas the Twin Swords only wiped out a regional admiral." A skeptic shook his head. "You're forgetting Ghost Sword. His bounty's 98 million Bailey, and that was 3 years ago. Ghost Hand's never even set foot on the Grand Line. Everybody knows the Grand Line is a pirate's graveyard. Countless powerful crews from the East, West, North, and South Seas have vanished there without a trace." Ghost Sword had shattered through the Grand Route, claimed a 98 million Bailey bounty, and then slipped away into the West Sea, its power all but unrivaled. As Nethin guided her toward Rhodes's western shore, the island's underground syndicates froze in disbelief. In an instant, Every covert faction and every whispering alley turned their eyes toward the looming threat on the horizon. Chapter 50. Recruitment. 10 miles offshore from the island, the warship came to a slow, deliberate stop. On the upper deck, Major General Nathan of the West Sea Branch gripped the railing and stared toward the distant shoreline, where only a small black speck marked the pirates' stronghold. His jaw was set, but beneath his calm exterior, nerves jittered like loose rigging in a storm. Headquarters had given him strict orders: do not engage, yet remain within striking distance. Once the Ghost Hand pirates and the Shuangjian corsairs clashed and suffered significant losses, he was to descend like a hammer from the heavens and crush them both. The plan was as brilliant as it was ruthless. If he succeeded, he'd secure a posting at headquarters, an honor he'd long sought. Still, duty carried a bitter taste when it meant standing by and watching pirates butcher one another, then swooping in to claim the victory. He steeled himself with the thought that history belongs to the victors. When the day was done, the world would read that the Imperial Navy had vanquished 2 fearsome pirate fleets in a single, decisive strike. That glory would be his. West coast of the island. The docks were unusually quiet. Only 3 massive square-rigged ships lay anchored here, each as large as a naval frigate, and all flying the twin-sword banner of the Shuangjian pirates. Unlike the elite hit-and-run tactics of Rhodes' Ghost Hand crew, the Shuangjian pirates favored sheer numbers and firepower. Fleets of stout vessels crewed by hardened fighters who wouldn't flinch at facing a navy squadron. Here, only the strongest were welcome. Along the waterfront, seasoned pirates clustered with hopeful recruits, trading boasts and sizing one another up. In the center of the makeshift arena stood a towering man, his broad chest marked by a single, knife-deep scar. He folded his arms over his breastplate and shouted over the roar of the waves, "Listen up. If you can withstand my 3 punches, you're in. No tricks. Just steel your nerve and come at me." A hush fell over the crowd. After a moment's hesitation, a young man stepped forward, muscles coiled beneath his worn leather jerkin. He squared his shoulders, raised his arms into a guarded stance, and met the scar-red giant's glare without flinching. "Is blocking all 3 of your blows enough to earn a place among the Shuangjian pirates?" he asked. The scarred recruiter grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Prove it." Nathan clenched his fists and reminded himself, "Shipboard life demands a certain toughness. My strength is only average, but it should hold up long enough to block a few blows." He met the pirate's eyes and nodded. The pirate's grin turned predatory. In an instant, he lunged forward and delivered a savage punch to the man who'd just stepped up. There was no time to brace. Bones snapped audibly under the pirate's fist, and the poor fellow was sent flying backward. He crashed to the deck, blood bubbling from his mouth. "So weak," the pirate sneered, withdrawing his fist and wiping it on his sleeve. He turned to the huddled crew. "Who's next? The Double Swords pirates set sail soon. This is your last chance to test your mettle." A heavy silence fell. One by one, the would-be challengers exchanged nervous glances, shook their heads, and took a step back. None dared volunteer. Several hopefuls pressed forward, eager to join the Shuangjian pirates, if only they could survive 3 solid punches from the ship's champion. Yet one by one, they backed away, discouraged by the pirate's fearsome reputation. "Is there no one left?" the pirate growled, scanning the silent crowd. Yesterday, challengers had lined up in droves. Today, not a single hand dared rise. Each would-be recruit had witnessed how one of the pirate's strikes could snap bones like twigs. A chorus of laughter rose from the crewmates behind him. "Looks like our guy's scaring them off," one jeered. "More fun for us." Flushing with embarrassment, the pirate scratched his head. "Hey, I wasn't even hitting at full power," he protested. "If ally let loose, well, nobody'd ever pass this test." He forced a sheepish smile. "Guess I'm not cut out to judge recruits after all." Just then, the crowd stirred. A young man in a worn fur hat, Nathan, stepped decisively through the throng, his eyes locked on the pirate. A hush fell as onlookers leaned in, breath held. The pirate raised an eyebrow and cracked his knuckles. "Well then," he said, his grin returning, "show me what you've got. 3 punches. If you block them all, you sail with us." Nathan squared his shoulders, preparing for the first blow. Around him, murmurs of excitement rippled through the deck. Perhaps this time, Someone would meet the challenge. Nethin squared his shoulders and met the pirate's grin with calm resolve. The seaman before him was broad-shouldered and thickly muscled, a stark contrast to Nethin's lean frame, and he looked almost amused by the challenge. "All right, boy," the pirate growled. "This time I won't hold back with my first punch." At that, a predatory glint flashed in the pirate's eyes. He coiled like a spring, then uncoiled with brutal speed, his fist hurtling toward Nethin with the force of a wrecking ball. The crack of knuckles on air echoed across the quay. Boom! And for an instant every spectator winced, certain the smaller fighter would go flying. But Nethin did not fall. He simply lifted his arm, palm open, and caught the pirate's blow squarely on his forearm. Wood and rope shuddered around them as the punch rattled harmlessly against flesh. "Blocked?" The onlookers whispered in disbelief. How could this wiry youth stop a strike that had sent seasoned brawlers sprawling? Pirates lining the dock stepped back, muttering among themselves as their confidence wavered. The atmosphere, once thick with jeers, hummed now with shock, and a hint of respect. Before anyone could recover, a second pirate, taller, scarred, and twice as broad, strode into the makeshift ring, cracking his knuckles. The murmur of the crowd swelled once more. The real test was only just beginning. Nethin stood before the recruitment officer of the Twin Sword Pirates, the man responsible for screening all new blood. Only moments ago, Nethin had casually caught a full-power punch from the gang's resident bruiser with one hand. That alone was proof enough of his worth. "All right, friend, what's your name?" the officer called out. "Nethin," he replied evenly. The officer's brow lifted. The name sounded familiar, but he insisted on a grin as broad as the sea. "Nethin, congratulations, you're in. Welcome to the Twin Sword Pirates." The instant the words left his mouth, everything fell silent. It was as if someone had pinched the world itself shut. Not a creak of wood, not a whisper of wind. Even the soft scuff of boots on deck seemed startlingly loud. 100 pairs of eyes turned on Nethin, their owners frozen in astonishment. No cheers, no questions, just wide-eyed shock, as though they'd all witnessed a miracle none dared applaud. After a heavy pause, Nethin met the recruiter's expectant stare without flinching. "When did I ever say I wanted to join you?" he asked softly. "Or, are you proposing I take command?" Nethin's words hung in the air like a challenge. In days gone by, any pirate who heard such insolence would have stormed forward without a second thought. But now, as an unnatural hush fell over the assembled crew of the double-sword pirates, their captain realized that something was terribly wrong. He stared at Nethin, the bold grin that had played across his features vanishing as if swept away by a sudden gale. A bead of cold sweat formed on his forehead and traced a slow path down his cheek. His voice trembled as he managed to choke out the words he never thought he'd utter. You are. Chapter 51, The Double-Bladed Dilo. I've already introduced myself, but it seems most people prefer to call me Ghost Hand. Nithin's voice was low and steady. He flexed his fingers, and with 2 sharp clicks, an unnatural force slithered along his knuckles. The hulking pirate whose arm Nethin had seized stared at him in horror. Agony warped his features as the bones in his forearm creaked and cracked. His scream choked off mid-word, and black ichor oozed onto the deck at their feet. A collective hiss rippled through the onlookers. Instinctively they backed away, clearing a wide circle around Nethin and the officer of the Shuangjian pirates. "Ghost Hand, Nethin," the officer whispered, sweat beading on his brow. He recognized Nethin now. Anyone would, after that display. Clenching his jaw at the sight of his comrade's shattered arm, he squared his shoulders and stepped forward. "Our Shuangjian pirates have no quarrel with the Ghost Hand fleet. Are you here to pick a fight?" He lifted his chin defiantly. "Anyone who dares strike me will pay with his life." Silence fell as Nethin locked eyes with the officer, the tension between the 2 pirate bands electric in the salty air. Nethin opened his mouth and, as casually as brushing away a fly, withdrew the palm that had sent waves of terror through the crowd. To most eyes, it was an ordinary hand, but sailors and pirates all over the Grand Line knew it as the Ghost Hand. He fixed the leader of the double-sword pirates with a steady, unreadable gaze. "As for fighting a war," Nethin said quietly, "if you're willing to surrender, there's no need for bloodshed." "Surrender? Don't make me laugh!" The pirate captain snarled, grinding his teeth. His bounty topped 10 million, but faced with a ghost hand user, even he felt his confidence waver. Hands trembling, he fumbled for his twin blades. Nithin took a single, measured step forward. He reached out, pressed his palm against the pirate's skull, and leaned in so his voice dropped to an icy whisper. Refuse to yield, and you die. The captain's hand froze on the hilt of his sword. His legs felt as heavy as stone, his arms like lead. Helplessly, he watched Nithin's palm bear down. Then, from the direction of the shore, two streams of sword chi roared in, coalescing around Nithin in a dazzling halo of crackling energy. Click! Nithin's palm lashed out, striking exactly where the two swords crossed. With an audible groan of stressed steel, both blades warped and then shattered into hundreds of glittering fragments. From the shoreline emerged a man in a crisp white top hat, twin slender swords sheathed at his hips. He strolled forward with casual confidence, stopping just beyond the broken blades. A faint smile curled his lips as he surveyed the debris. Picking on my men, Ghost Hand Rhodes? I don't think so. A hush fell over the clearing, rippling among the onlookers. That's Captain Dilo of the Twin Swords Pirates, someone murmured, voice low with awe and apprehension. Long before Nethin's name spread across the West Sea, and long before the mysterious ghost sword struck from the shadows, Dilo had been hailed as the greatest rookie pirate of his generation. Then, as Nethin's legend grew and the ghost sword made clandestine strikes, Dilo's fame slipped from the headlines, but never truly died. After 3 relentless years, his skill remained legendary. A 59 million berry bounty hung over his head, enough to make any pirate hunter's mouth water. If anyone still carried that profession, they'd jump at the chance to claim it. But times had changed, allegiances had shifted, and for now, the real battle was just beginning. Nethin's voice was calm, almost gentle. As his words faded, a strange energy surged down through his legs into the ground. With a low rumble, the soil before him twisted and writhed, sprouting thick, root-like tendrils that snaked across the deck. In seconds, the band of Shuangjian pirates, those same fighters rescued by Shuangjian Diluo, found themselves bound fast in earth and stone, unable to move. Shuangjian Diluo halted abruptly, his expression turning ice-cold. He leveled a venomous glare at Nithin. Anyone who dares threaten the Shuangjian pirates is doomed, he spat. Funny you should pick that fight. Nethin's lips curved into a faint smile. Then the choice is simple, he said. Either I destroy your Shuangjian pirates, or I'm destroyed by you. A furious fire lit in Diluo's eyes. To him, Nethin had become a madman. Very well, he drawled. If it's a duel you want, we'll settle it in the Western Sea. With that, he slid both blades into their scabbards, then, faster than the eye could follow, drew them again in a single smooth motion. In an instant, Diluo's twin swords flashed under the sun. He adopted his signature stance and roared, Twin Blade Iaijutsu. The air seemed to tremble as he prepared to strike. Nethin tensed, ready to meet him blow for blow. The battle for the Western Sea had begun. The two torrents of sword chi sliced through the air with blinding speed, their deadly arcs converging on the very spot where Nithin stood. If they struck him, he'd be cleaved in half. At long last, Twin Blade Dilo and Ghost Hand Rhodes had opened their fight, though both had already fallen back some distance. From the bleachers and the sidelines, dozens of eyes were fixed on them, anxiety rippling through the crowd. Rhodes's 92 million berry bounty and ruthless reputation made him a terrifying opponent, but Dilo's mastery of dual swords was no joke either. Again the blade chi surged. In raw cutting power, Dilo's twin arcs rivaled Rhodes's famed Ghost Slash. But where Dilo's energy was pure and sharp, Rhodes's slashes carried an overwhelming martial force, an oppressive weight of power that Dilo simply couldn't match. To Rhodes, the twin chi presented virtually no threat. Then whir! Nethin swept his arm forward, fingertips outstretched. With a crack of unseen energy, he froze the two converging chi streams at their intersection. In one fluid motion, he twisted his wrist. The frozen currents coiled together and imploded into a single, pulsating mode of light, and then vanished. Everyone gasped as though the air had turned to ice, their eyes widened in stunned disbelief. Diluo himself froze, shock flickering across his face. His own slash, renowned for both its blinding speed and overwhelming power, had been met head-on by Nethin's phantom hand, then blocked without so much as a grunt. How could anyone withstand a blow like that? Sand-bound coffin, Nethin whispered, opening his palm and flicking his wrist in a fluid motion. The power of the twist-twist fruit needed a medium to travel through, and on this beach, the countless grains of sand formed the perfect conduit. At his command, the sand beneath Diluo's boots writhed and surged, curling into a living trap that snaked toward him with predatory intent. Diluo's eyes narrowed. He'd already seen Rhodes annihilate his men with this very maneuver and refused to be snared by it himself. With every ounce of strength, he stamped free of the tangled sand, sending granules spraying in all directions. Then he charged, blades drawn. Steel sang as his twin swords moved in perfect unison, weaving a furious slash aimed straight for Nethin's face. The beach trembled beneath their clash, two unstoppable forces colliding in a fight neither man was prepared to lose. He brought the twin blades up, holding them horizontally, and drove them in a head-on slash at Nethin. The two torrents of sword ki spiraled together, merging into a single murderous wave of energy. "Is that really your best?" Nethin asked, voice cool and unhurried. Without hesitation, he stretched out both hands, gripping the very air before him and snaring the onrushing sword chi between his palms. Then he squeezed. A low hum filled the air as the vast roaring blade energy collapsed into a quivering orb of light, an intricate core woven from countless threads of sword chi. In the next heartbeat, Nethin seized his sword pill in one hand, sprang forward in a single fluid motion, and vanished into an afterima, only to reappear inches from Diluo's face. Every ounce of his killing intent focused on that lethal strike. Chapter 52, Ghost Sword. Yarodilo already knew he stood no chance against Nethin the moment the young man unleashed his empty-handed anger slash. Seeing Nethin barreling toward him with terrifying speed and intent, Dilo didn't hesitate. He fell back at once. But as he retreated, the very sand beneath his boots erupted, coiling around his ankle like a living chain. With a violent jerk, Dilo wrenched free from the choking grains, but the reprieve was fleeting. Nethin closed the distance in two bound-like steps, drawing in a breath that crackled with killing intent. In his outstretched hand hovered the sword pill, its twisted force coalescing into a solid orb of crackling chi. "Drink this!" Nethin roared, launching the gleaming sphere directly at his opponent. Dilo's pupils shrank. He had nowhere to dodge. Gritting his teeth, he brought both blades into a tight crossguard and slammed them against the oncoming orb. A sizzling screech ripped through the air as fire met water, the blast of chi buffeting his arms like a battering ram. Every muscle trembled under the strain, every nerve afire with pain. For 2 long seconds, the orb pressed into his defense. Then, at the limit of its energy, it shuddered and shattered. A flash of light dissolved the sword pill into a dozen motes of fading radiance. Dilo's legs buckled. He swallowed a ragged breath, relief flooding him at last. But before he could straighten, something even more menacing stirred in the shifting sands. Nethin's fingers closed lightly around the crossed blades in Delo's hands. In an instant, a humming force, twisting, unrelenting, surged from his grip, racing up the sword blades and encasing Delo in its power. Delo's eyes widened in horror. He tried to jerk his hands away to let go of the hilts, but the torque held him fast. With a metallic clatter, both swords slipped from his grasp. Unequipped and off balance, he had no hope of parrying the invisible pressure crushing him. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Until moments ago, most had quietly favored Delo. His reputation as a dual sword master was well known, but this match was over almost as soon as it began. Nethin's raw strength proved overwhelming, far beyond anything anyone had anticipated. Blood spurted from Delo's mouth as he staggered back, coughing violently. Fear flickered in his eyes as he attempted to rise, but his legs gave way beneath him. On the ground, he lay defeated, the life nearly drained from him. Nethin withdrew his fingers from the swords and stepped forward. There was no mercy in his gaze, only the cold certainty of victory. Nethin's footsteps barely disturbed the shore's loose sand and gravel. Yet under his light tread, the earth seemed to ripple like water, surging up to engulf the struggling figure of Dilo. With a casual flick of his wrist, Nethin swept his hand through the trembling sands, and then, with a thunderous crack, the very ground squeezed the life out of the pirate. Mollified grains parted, revealing blood that oozed sluggishly before the body went still. In that same instant, A cold, mechanical voice sounded in Nethin's mind. Bounty collected, 59,000 Baileys. Target double sword Delo neutralized. Reward disbursed, plus 70 talent proficiency points, plus 1 free talent point. This was the first time Nethin had claimed a target worth between 50 and 100 million Baileys, and the windfall of proficiency in that precious free talent point was more than welcome. He stepped back from the lifeless mound of sand, paying no heed to the distant cries of horror and terror that rose from the beach. Instead, he fixed his gaze on a ship moored not far off. More precisely, he stared up at its mainmast. There, perched as if he were part of the rigging, sat a lone figure. A man draped in a dark cloak, a sword sheathed at his side, surveyed the killing scene below with quiet detachment. Nethin's eyes narrowed. Whatever game this cloaked stranger was playing, it had just grown a great deal more interesting. Nethin's eyes narrowed as he fixed his gaze on the distant ship's upper mast. There, standing motionless in a dark cloak, was none other than Yarrow, nicknamed the Ghost Sword and feared as the mastermind behind the Double Sword Pirates. He carried a bounty of 98 million berries. Even as Delo lay shattered and defeated by Rhodes below, Yarrow had not lifted a finger to intervene. Instead, he watched with detached interest. Those observing the scene from ashore all felt Nethin's silent command. Turning in unison, they spotted that lone figure on the coastal ship. A hush fell over the crowd before someone whispered, "Ghost Sword? Yarrow." The name sent a collective shiver through them, and even the toughest pirates exchanged awed glances. In this era of great piracy, few dared ignore the Grand Line's terrible reputation. To sailors and rogues alike, it was a place of both legends and nightmares. And while the West Sea had spawned countless pirate crews over the past decade, only one, red-haired Shanks's band, had truly earned its fearsome renown on the Grand Line. More than 95% of those who set sail for its treacherous waters never returned, their wrecked vessels serving as grim warnings to all who followed. Now, in the gathering dusk, another name, Yarrow the Ghost Sword, loomed large on every lip. Few are like Ghostblade Yarrow, few who earn a name on the great route and still return to the West Sea unscathed. He was, without question, one of them. Cloaked in shadows, Yarrow had been perched atop the mainmast, watching Nethin's silent vigil on the shore. Then, with a soft, knowing chuckle, he leapt down and landed lightly on the sand, no more than 30 paces from Nethin. He strode forward and halted 10 meters before them, oblivious to the half-buried body of Dilo lying in the dunes. Nethin met his gaze coolly. "You don't seem very concerned about your crew," Nethin remarked. Yarrow shook his head slowly. "Concern? Hardly. The useless were already struck from my roster." He paused, eyeing Nethin with growing interest. "You killed Dilo so effortlessly. Your power outstrips most scoundrels in the West Sea. So tell me, your true target is the Great Root, isn't it?" Nethin turned to the cloaked youth without a word, his calm gaze unflinching. "If you're here just to spout nonsense, then let's not waste each other's time." A low chuckle escaped Ghost Sword Yarrow. His breath curled in the chill air. "Why the rush? We've still got plenty of time before the Great Root opens. What I want to tell you matters." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a grave whisper. "The dangers of the Great Sea are far beyond anything you've faced. Even a massive fleet can vanish overnight. In today's West Sea, a new generation of pirates prowls the waves, ruthless, unpredictable. Only a fool would go it alone." Nethin's expression didn't change. "I'm not interested in partnerships," he said flatly. Yarrow straightened, running a hand through his dark hair. His casual grin fell away, replaced by genuine seriousness. "I'm serious, too. An equal partnership, no strings attached. Think about it. I'd rather have a rising star like you at my side than across from me in battle." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted, and honestly, I'd hate to see it end with me having to kill you out on the West Sea." Chapter 53, Rhodes vs. Ghost Sword Yarrow. The moment Yarrow's words fell upon the field, the air thickened with sudden tension. What had been a scene of complacency snapped into sharp alertness. Pirates of the Shuangjiang crew and the townsfolk alike went wide-eyed, their faces drained of blood. Ghost Sword Yarrow's invitation to partner with Ghost Hand Rhodes was electrifying news, enough to send shockwaves through the entire West Sea. His final, half-threatening quip only underscored the arrogance he'd earned on the Grand Route, a boastful swagger befitting a pirate lord. "Partner with you." Nethin's voice remained unnervingly calm, the word drawn out as he studied Yarrow. Expecting an easy yes, Yarrow allowed himself a confident smile. Then Nethin finished his sentence, his tone almost casual. "And slink off the Grand Route with your tail between your legs?" In an instant, Yarrow's grin froze. Color drained from his face, replaced by a dark cloud of fury. Every onlooker felt their pulse quicken. For the first time since he'd appeared on the sea lanes, Ghost Sword Yarrow looked anything but in control. Nethin had no greater shame than being driven off the Grand Route and forced to slip back into the Western Sea to rebuild his fleet in secret. To the phantom hand of Navy headquarters, that retreat was the unforgivable defeat he'd sworn never to forgive. He watched Nethin across the salt-choked waves, lips curling into a savage grin. "So much courage," the phantom hand drawled, voice low and mocking. "But it ends here." With deliberate slowness, he drew a sword from his back. The blade's steel shimmered scarlet, as though it thirsted for blood, and a fierce, malevolent aura pulsed around him. Nethin met that merciless gaze without a flicker of fear. His face was calm, his eyes empty of doubt or dread. "Is that all?" he asked quietly. "Then let's see it." In the next instant, the phantom hand let out a savage laugh and hurled the blade toward Nethin. The sword, called Yarrow, sliced through the air like a thunderbolt, its edge honed for one purpose: to erase Nethin once and for all, ensuring the Grand Route would be free of this calamity on its future voyage. The speed of the ghost sword Yarrow was astonishing, far exceeding even the ghost spider technique of the headquarters Major General. It was a bit more than Nethin had anticipated, but only by a hair. With a thunderous whoosh, Yarrow lunged forward. Anticipating the strike with arrogant confidence, Nethin read his opponent's movement to the letter. A heartbeat before the blade arrived, he unleashed the coiling energy within his arm. His fist met the spectral sword in a blinding flash of crimson light. The shockwave of their collision rocked the clearing, and the blood-red sword aura shuddered as it struck Nethin's unyielding defense. Despite its incredible speed, Yarrow couldn't match Nethin's raw power and was driven backward, skidding across the ground. Staggering to regain form, the ghost sword, or rather its wielder, stared at Nethin in stunned disbelief. It had never expected that, even under such a lightning-quick assault, Nethin would react so precisely and counter with such force. And judging by the lack of any further strain on his challenger's face, he clearly hadn't even been pushed to his limit. Nethin's fist met Ghost Sword Yarrow's blade and sent it skidding backward. Without pausing, he planted his foot hard into the sandy ground. The earth heaved, and a wall of sand surged up to slam into Yarrow's sword. "I've seen through your tricks," Nethin said coolly. "They won't work on me." Yarrow snorted. In an instant, he blurred into a ghostly afterimage, vanishing into the swirling sand. When he reappeared, he was already in striking range. "Do you know why they call me Ghost Sword? Not for my blade skills, but for my footwork, my speed. No one can predict my moves," he boasted. "Shunpo, ghost!" His laughter rang out like a blade cutting the air. The moment his words faded, 3 blood-red arcs of sword chi shot toward Nethin from 3 arrayed angles, converging in a deadly pincer maneuver. The air whistled as each blade of energy sought its mark. Nethin allowed himself a faint smile. Impressive speed, but still too slow. Nethin stood his ground as 3 blood-red arcs of sword chi converged on him from every direction. He kept his voice calm. Then, in a heartbeat, he twisted his body twice and slipped through the churning energy as if the gap were made for him alone. Where the blades had struck, the sandy ground exploded into jagged fissures, some 20 to 30 meters long and wide. Townsfolk and pirates alike gaped in disbelief. Yarrow's legendary ghost step had erased him from view in an instant, leaving only a faint, shimmering afterimage. Even the most skilled warriors could scarcely keep him in sight. And yet Nethin's counter was equally astonishing. With 2 effortless, fluid motions, he evaded all 3 slashes, his form vanishing beneath the onslaught. At such a level of combat, human senses strained at the limits. Who would gain the upper hand now? No one could say. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as hearts thundered with anticipation. Every spectator held their breath, unable to predict the outcome of this breathtaking duel. Ghost hands and ghost swords are the pinnacle of pirate power in the West Sea. No other crew can match their might. The outcome of this duel will irrevocably decide who truly rules these waters. At their level, any pirate strong enough to stand here could dominate an entire sea if they chose to stay rather than venture out on the Grand Line. On the battlefield, Ghost Sword Yarrow weaved and darted, his blade a fleeting silhouette in the dusky light. From the sidelines, Nethin, formerly known as Ross, studied his opponent and realized that while Yarrow's footwork was sharper, his own strength lay elsewhere. Instead of charging headlong, Nethin drew in a steady breath and unleashed his distortion separation technique. A low hum rolled across the clearing as his form wavered. In the blink of an eye, 4 perfect copies of Nethin appeared, each standing at a different corner of the arena. From a distance, there was no way to tell which was real and which were phantoms. The quartet spread out, backs turned to one another, encircling the flickering ghost sword wielder. Yarrow paused, his ghostly steps stuttering for the first time. Phantom clones. An annoying trick, indeed. He frowned, eyes narrowing as he searched for the true Nethin among the 4 indistinguishable figures. Nethin held back, refusing to overwhelm his opponents with everything he knew. He planned to test them one by one, but just as he launched his first strike, all 4 figures of Rhodes kicked up at once. A whirlwind of dust and grit tore through the arena, blotting out his vision. Whoosh! Whoosh! The choking sandstorm swirled around him, and through the haze Nethin saw 4 blurred silhouettes flickering in and out of sight. He had to figure out which figure was the real Rhodes and which were mere illusions, while also guarding against the strange crackling energy clinging to each swirl of sand. The very speed that had once been his greatest asset now counted for nothing. Heart-pounding, Nethin narrowed his focus. He watched for the subtlest telltale sign, a shift in stance, a glint of light reflecting off armor, the faintest disturbance in the dusty wind. Only by trusting his instincts and keeping his senses razor-sharp could he hope to pierce the veil of illusions and strike down the true adversary before the others closed in. Chapter 54. Quicksand Waterfall. A haze of dust and sand swirled around them, and faint afterimages flickered in the choking wind. Occasionally, the crack of steel rang out, followed by a flash of sword chi that sliced through the airborne grit and gouged a deep scar into the rocky shoreline. Yarrow's phantom blade whistled through one of Nethin's sand-formed clones. But before the specter could press its advantage, he sensed a sudden rush of air at his back. He cursed under his breath and thrust his sword around to parry. The moment his steel met Nethin's fist, a twisting torque rippled through Yarrow's arm, shattering the precision of his block. His sword screamed on the edge of collision, and a jolt of pain shot up his numb, trembling limb. Gasping, Yarrow broke free from the impact and stumbled back more than 10 meters. In mid-retreat, he switched his sword to his left hand, then slammed his right fist against his own arm 2 or 3 times to drive out the burning ache. He didn't follow the domineering path like Nethin did, and his arm simply wasn't conditioned to withstand that kind of contortion. Had Nethin channeled some of the twisting force into his sand illusions, that punch would have seriously injured him. One thing was clear. Getting in close was a losing proposition against this opponent. Nethin's power was proving far more troublesome than Yarrow had ever imagined. They'd clashed 3 or 4 times already, and each encounter left Yarrow reeling from Nethin's strange abilities. If he hadn't backed off at the last second, his arms would by now be half crippled. Kachi! Kachi! Unable to match Nethin in a straight duel, Yarrow resorted to long-range sword energy, hurling wave after wave of blade chi, but the choking dust and Nethin's phantom clones swallowed every strike, rendering each slash as effective as a mud cow sinking in the sea. Finally admitting he was burning strength for nothing, Yarrow let out a low snort. Planting both hands on his hilt, he vanished in an instant, a flash step, reappearing elsewhere on the battlefield. Ha! 2 immense arcs of blood-red sword chi erupted from his blade, one sweeping left, the other right, cleaving through swirling sand and dust, shredding both Nethin's body and his illusory doubles. "Done with all your tricks?" Yarrow taunted, the crimson afterglow fading around him. But Nethin simply met his gaze with cool detachment. With a calm breath, he withdrew his projection, drawing back the twisting, sand-born power that had so confounded Yarrow. And just like that, the battlefield fell silent once more. Nethin gathered every ounce of his twisting power into his hands and squared off against one of the blood-red sword chi probes. The blade essence roared in defiance, but under Nethin's unrelenting grip, it was crushed between his palms, and then violently flung back toward its caster. Standing firm, John Wentz, known as the Phantom Sword Yarrow, revealed a cold smirk. He had anticipated the move. With ruthless precision, he intercepted the returning sword chi mid-flight, preparing to redirect it to its next landing point. "You'd use my own trick against me? How presumptuous," Yarrow sneered. As the crimson chi barreled toward him, he slammed his blood-tinted blade into the air. The incoming energy shattered against steel, scattering into harmless motes of light. But Nethin was already in motion. He dropped into a low stance and drove both hands into the sandy beach. Boom! Unlike the slower, foot-driven technique he'd used before, twisting power channeled through his hands was astonishingly flexible and brutally effective. Instantly, the ground around him, dozens of meters in every direction, quaked and heaved under the shockwave unleashed. Nethin's eyes narrowed as he drew in a steady breath. "Quicksand. Waterfall," he intoned, and the air around him seemed to ripple. His mastery of distortion magic surged outward, pulling in every grain of sand along the shore. Ghost Sword Yarrow, already wary of Nethin's growing power, sensed the shift the moment the sand began to churn. He tensed, planning to fall back and put as much distance between them as possible. But he underestimated just how fluid and expansive Nethin's spell could be. Instead of manipulating only a patch of sand, Nethin had silently drawn in every speck from the entire beach. Now an immense wall of sand rose behind him, curling forward like a tidal wave. It thundered down upon Ghost Sword Yarrow, cutting off his retreat. The golden beach melted into a rolling, roaring mass that threatened to bury him unless he plunged into the sea. Yarrow's sword hand twitched. He had only one real option: dive into the cold surf and hope to ride out the onrushing deluge. Behind him, the cliffside spectators, mages, warriors, and a handful of common folk, stood stunned. They could scarcely believe the scale of Nethin's attack. Sand surged in great swells toward the ocean, and for the first time, everyone realized that underestimating him might have been a dire mistake. This is the power of the most feared pirate in the Western Sea, Ghost Hand Nethin. Such strength defies belief. To ordinary men, it seems almost inhuman. Nethin stood behind a wall of shifting sand dunes, his calm gaze radiating sheer dominance as he tracked the battle unfolding before him. From the very start, he had drawn the fight away from the shoreline and into open water. Now, beyond the dunes, there was nothing but the sea, and nowhere left for Yarrow the Ghost Sword to run. No matter how swift his blade arm or how light his footwork, with the sea at his back and every escape route cut off, Yarrow had no room to dodge. If he dove into the waves, his speed would count for nothing, and Nethin, with the uncanny precision of his moonstep technique, could cut him down the moment he emerged from the surf. All these possibilities passed through Nethin's mind in an instant. Then, with cold certainty, he whispered, "Behind the dunes." Yarrow, the Ghost Sword, wasn't a devil fruit user, but he knew all too well that if he retreated into the water, he'd lose the edge his speed gave him. So he squared his shoulders, drew a steady breath, and struck with every ounce of strength he had left. "One-shot dance slash," he roared. Clutching his sword in both hands, he painted the air with blood-red arcs. One after another, razor-sharp slashes cut through the rolling walls of sand. Because the sand waves stretched so wide, their power was spread thin, and Yarrow's relentless assault tore them to pieces. Each swing split the dunes apart, and the tumbling grains could barely slow his advance. "Pretty impressive reach," he called out coolly, glancing toward the hidden figure somewhere behind the shattered sand. "But your strikes lack punch. You'll exhaust yourself trying to match me. Simplicity won't win this fight." From his concealed vantage point, Nethin, master of sand, heard every word. His hands trembled as he gathered the scattered currents at his command. The grains of sand swirled and thickened, condensing into a tighter, more menacing force. He gritted his teeth, bracing himself for the next exchange. The battle was far from over. Nethin pressed his 5 fingers into the shifting sands, channeling every ounce of his power into a single downward thrust. Immediately, the ground before him began to roil, the grain swirling and rising like a storm-tossed sea. In seconds, it towered into a 20-meter-high wall of sand, roaring forward with unstoppable force. On the shore, Ghost Sword Yarrow's face drained of color. He had not expected this. Nethin, a newcomer from the West Sea, was wielding such overwhelming might. Clenching his teeth, Yarrow gripped his sword with both hands, eyes blazing with defiance. "The Vice Admiral's fleet couldn't stop you," he growled. "But I," he let out a savage cry. "Ghost cut!" Crimson sword key flared along his blade as he slashed upward, driving the poisoned edge straight through the base of the sand wave. For an instant, the tumbling wall split apart, revealing the town behind it, and Nethin's lone figure bracing against the storm of sand. Yarrow all owed himself the ghost of a triumphant smile, only to have it wiped away in an instant. With a thunderous rumble, the severed sands collapsed back into place, pouring down like a landslide and sealing the gap. Torrents of grit buried him from sight. "No!" he screamed as grain after grain swallowed both sword and man. Monstrous waves of sand thundered down, completely burying Yarrow, the spectral sword. Chapter 55. Devil Sheriff Lafitte. The towering wall of silt-laden sand gave way and crashed down in a thunderous roar. Tons of earth plunged into the sea, sending a massive wave surging ashore. Amid the tumult, a few frightened shrimp and crabs were swept up in the debris, their frantic thrashing barely visible beneath the roiling sediment. But it wasn't sea creatures that drew Nethin's attention. A patch of sand, some meters from him, began to writhe as though something alive fought to break free. Calmly, he knelt and pressed both palms against the trembling ground. A coil of arcane energy spiraled through him and shot into the earth. "Sandstorm! Burial!" A deafening boom answered his command. The once shifting floor of sand and silt collapsed inward, twisted by Nethin's power until it gave way entirely. A stretch of beach tens of meters wide caved in, swallowing every sign of movement. Within seconds, the surface stilled. No wriggling crustaceans, no hint of what had tried to emerge. Silence reigned. Then, like clockwork, the familiar chime of his system interface sounded in Nethin's mind. He rose to his full height, and with a modest shake of his head, dismissed the prideful urge to double-check the site. Whatever was gone, it was gone for good. The bounty was set at 98 million Baileys. Having completed the hunt for the ghost sword Yarrow, Nethin strode forward and collected his reward, 35 points of talent proficiency and 1 free talent point. 1 free talent point? At first, Nethin's expression barely flickered. Then a slow grin appeared. 35 proficiency points weren't extraordinary, but that single free point, added to the 2 he'd already earned from the Shuangjiandeluo skirmish, meant real progress. In barely half a year with the Ghost Hand Pirates, he'd accumulated 3 free talent points. It was an unquestionably successful mission. Nethin glanced at his commander, who gave a curt nod of approval. Behind the crowd, Robin watched from the edge of the dunes, her lips curving into a faint smile. Even she, who had trained alongside Nethin from the moment he'd joined the crew, felt a pang of surprise. When he first came aboard, he'd been green and untested, hardly a match for hardened pirate captains or battle-seasoned generals. Now, though, he stood tall enough to shatter enemy warships in a single strike. Branch-level admirals and headquarters-rank officers, let alone the scattered remnants of the Great Rote pirates, had fallen before him without ever realizing the threat Nethin posed until it was too late. Robin's eyes gleamed with pride. "Looks like our captain has done it again," she murmured. Nethin pocketed his rewards and turned to join his shipmates. A new chapter in his rise to power was just beginning, and the legend of the Ghost Hand's prodigy would only grow from here. Robin stood on the distant shoreline, convinced that the admirals who had falsely branded Nethin a pirate must be racked with regret by now. All was inexplicably silent. The townspeople stared toward the sea, still trembling from shock, and then, as their eyes swept the horizon, fresh dread took hold. There wasn't a single sail in motion. Only one terrible explanation presented itself. The ghost sword had fallen. That infamous pirate, who'd retreated from the Grand Line and carried a 98 million Bailey bounty, had been utterly outmatched by the Ghost Hand Rhodes. Like a shooting star, Rhodes had appeared and cut through the West Blue with unstoppable ferocity. Whispers raced through the crowd. Could this ghost hand be the next red-haired Shanks? At the mere mention of the red-haired pirate's captain, whose exploits filled countless newspapers and who was officially denounced as one of the world's most dangerous men, people shuddered. Though the West Blue's grand route remained shrouded in mystery, the names red-haired Shanks and white-beard Edward Newgate were spoken in awe from one end of the sea to the other. And now, all eyes turned to the rising storm that was Ghost Hand Rhodes, Nethin himself. A hush settled over the dockside tavern when one of the sailors, still pale from shock, finally spoke. He shook his head, staring at his companion. "You don't get it. Do you know how many red-haired pirates scour these seas? There are more pirates out there than stars in the sky, but only a handful stand head and shoulders above the rest, and he's one of them." He pressed a hand to his chest as if to steady his racing heart. Shanks was born in the West Sea. Some sneer at his origins, but others wear it as a badge of honor, just like the East Blue reveres Roger, the Pirate King. Even now, Roger's legacy burns bright, and Shanks, he's the same kind of legend down here. His companion nodded slowly, drawing in a steadying breath. But in this West Sea, nobody's fool enough to challenge him. He's unshakable, the strongest pirate of our generation in these waters. Murmurs of awe and anxiety rippled through the tavern. Outside, the afternoon sun lit the decks of 3 vessels moored at the pier, the ships of the feared double-sword pirates. Without breaking his stride, Nethin, renowned for slaying the dread ghost sword Yarrow, walked down the gangplank. He didn't approach to finish anyone off. Nethin never worried about revenge. But he believed every story needed closure, and he intended to tie up loose ends. A lookout cried, "Hey, look who's here." From the crow's nest came the sharp command, "Hoist the anchor, we set sail." In an instant, sailors scurried to their stations, and the chains clattered as the anchor came free. The breeze filled the sails. As the 3 pirate ships began to glide from the harbor, all eyes turned to Nethin, standing alone on the pier, silent, unflinching, and ready for whatever came next. The 3 ships of the Shuangjin pirates drifted listlessly against the shore, their crews still reeling from the sudden death of their captain at the hands of Nethin. When the towering figures strode toward them, panic rippled through the decks. Some pirates fumbled for muskets, others hastily loaded cannonballs spiked with shrapnel, and several, eyes wide with terror, leaped overboard in a desperate bid for freedom. Chaos reigned as muskets cracked and cannons thundered. Within moments, the 3 vessels were torn to splinters. In the aftermath, Nethin tallied his spoils. Although each pirate carried a hefty bounty of 10 to 20 million, individual kills yielded only modest gains in talent proficiency. Yet by felling dozens of them in rapid succession, he had amassed 5 additional proficiency points, small perhaps, but every point counted. In total, the rout of the Shuangjian pirates awarded him 110 talent proficiency points and unlocked 2 free talent points. It had been a remarkably lucrative skirmish. After felling the last pirate ship and cutting down scores of their crew, Nethin slipped ashore. He made no effort to examine his freshly gained talents. Instead, he melted away into the crowd before anyone could register his departure. Moments later, he reappeared at the edge of the throng, right beside Robin. "Have you found any trace of him?" he asked quietly. Robin shook her head. "Nothing. My mission wasn't to help you fight the Twin Blades pirates. It was to track down Devil Sheriff Lafitte amid all this chaos. But he either never showed up, or he's hiding so well that even my Huahua fruit illusions can't detect him." Nethin rubbed his chin, eyes narrowing as he weighed the possibilities. A sudden spark danced in his gaze. He pivoted toward a shadowed alley not far away, where a stifled, sinister laugh echoed from within. Almost at once, Nethin bolted forward and vanished into the darkness. No sooner had he crossed the alley's threshold than a figure burst out of hiding, vaulting onto a nearby rooftop. Without hesitation, Nethin sprang after him, determined not to lose this new lead. Nethin pressed on through the storm-tossed night, every instinct honed by his unparalleled seamanship guiding him forward. At last, he closed the distance. Before him stood a tall, pale-faced man in a black katop hat, a polished cane gripped lightly in one gloved hand. Recognition struck Nethin like lightning. This was no ordinary pirate, This was the Blackbeard of old, known in the original tales as the Sea Devil. He served as the navigator of the pirate flotilla and captained its fifth ship, the infamous Devil Sheriff Lafitte. Chapter 56, The Return of the Navigator. Compared to the first time Rhodes had tangled with him, Lafitte looked exactly the same, no younger, no older, yet his talent for vanishing had never been sharper. Even Rhodes, with all his cunning and authority, had tried every stratagem to pin Lafitte down, only to watch him slip away and reappear elsewhere, leaving no clue behind. This time, though, there was nowhere left to run. Cornered by Nethin, Lafitte finally abandoned the chase. He climbed onto the rooftop, set down his crutches, and offered a gesture of helpless surrender. Nethin regarded him calmly. "You're not the type to stay idle," Nethin observed. "How would you like to turn the world upside down? With me?" Surprise flickered across Lafitte's face. After a brief pause, he placed a hand over his heart, dipped into a gentlemanly bow, and smiled. "It would be an honor to serve as navigator for the Ghost Hand Pirates, Captain," he declared. "I've spent my time tracking events throughout the world and the West Sea, compiling every scrap of intelligence on how the Ghost Hand Pirates rose to power after the West Sea's ascension." Nethin had never been one for a quiet life. Restless by nature, he was always looking for an opening, any crack in reality, to slip away from this world. He hadn't expected Rhodes to hunt him down so soon, but here he was. Invitation or refusal, neither carried an absolute advantage. In Nethin's mind, only the smartest choice mattered. He allowed himself a small, wry smile. Rhodes, persistent as ever, had cornered him, and now it was time to decide. That decision took shape the moment he laid eyes on Lafitte. Known both as the Devil Sheriff and the finest sailor in the archipelago, Lafitte moved with the confidence of a gentleman. One hand rested on the brim of his wide-brimmed hat, tilting it down just enough to hide his eyes. His lithe frame suggested stealth, his posture hinted at readiness. In a single, smooth motion, he flipped the brim back up with his fingertips, an understated invitation to partnership. Recruiting Lafitte had proven almost too easy. The man carried no visible baggage, yet seemed to hold everything he owned in hidden pockets and secret pouches. With Lafitte on board, their voyage across the waters would be unstoppable. Before long, their small party reached the bustling docks of the Water Sea. The wind ruffled sails overhead as they disembarked. Rhodes smiled at his new ally. "Welcome aboard, Lafitte," he said, then beckoned Nethin to follow. They crossed two busy streets, alongside creaking wagons and shouting merchants, until they reached a low brick townhouse. Inside, a woman sat at a cluttered desk covered in maps and coded dispatches. Rhodes cleared his throat. "Nicole Robin, meet Lafitte, our navigator." Robin glanced up, her sharp eyes flicking from Rhodes to Lafitte. With a single nod, she acknowledged the newcomer. Rhodes placed a firm hand on Lafitte's shoulder. "Lafitte is now part of our crew. Together, we'll chart a course none of our enemies will ever anticipate." In that moment, Nethin felt the current shift beneath his feet. With Lafitte's cunning and Robin's intelligence network, the restless boy, now man, prepared to leap into adventure once more. Nethin and Lafitte were both celebrated for their razor-sharp minds, though in some ways, Lafitte's strategic genius even outshone Nico Robin's encyclopedic knowledge. As they spoke beneath the shade of a coastal grove, Lafitte casually tapped his bright red cane against the ground. "You realize the Navy's probably got informants watching us right now," Lafitte remarked with a half-smile. He glanced around, then back at Nethin. "Men posted along the shoreline, keeping tabs on our every move." Nethin waved a hand dismissively. "Of course they do. Any island we land on will have Navy lookouts, but until we actually cross into the Grand Line, they won't dare interfere." He met Lafitte's gaze coolly. "No need to worry." Lafitte lowered his cane, considering. He'd been ready to propose a little mischief, intercept, ting those Navy eyes, feeding them false coordinates, but realized it was unnecessary. "Very well. If there's nothing else, head back to the ship. You should start plotting our course. The Grand Line awaits, and it's no place for the unprepared." He chuckled darkly, that strange, unshakable grin playing on his lips. "You'll be our navigator. Chart every island, choose the safest channels. We sail soon, and I wouldn't trust anyone else with this job." "I'll hand over the chart and compass once we're aboard," Nethin said, turning on his heel. Without a word, Rhodes led the way down the narrow street, Lafitte and Robin close at his side. Despite the bustle of the town, the three of them met no resistance. Curious onlookers who recognized Nethin slipped into doorways and alleys, peeking out from the shadows as the small party passed. Not a single naval agent dared to step forward under the watchful gaze of the feared ghost hand. Before long, Nethin, Lafitte, and Robin reached their ship and climbed aboard without incident. The Navy's undercover operatives kept their distance, unwilling to provoke a confrontation with Rhodes. Meanwhile, more than 10 miles away, a naval warship steamed toward the island. In the admiral's cabin, a senior officer gripped his communicator, his face etched with tension. "Report," he barked as soon as the channel opened. "What's the outcome of the assault?" A crisp voice crackled back. "Sir, the Twin Swords pirates have been routed. There were no casualties on our side. The ghost hand, Rhodes, secured a decisive victory, and he's brought an unexpected prisoner aboard his vessel." Chapter 8. Major General Fontaine stared at the dispatch in disbelief. Admiral Rhodes had not only crushed the Two Swords pirates in the waters of Water Gold, he had done so without a single casualty on either side. That victory left Fontaine with nothing to leverage. Even more troubling, rumors insisted a mysterious stowaway had boarded Rhodes's flagship, a young man named Nethin. Fontaine slammed his fist on the desk. "This can't stand," he growled, snatching up the communicator. "Did you get those photographs? I want proof of this. Visitor. Send them to me immediately. We may have failed to capture the Ghost Hand and Shuangjian pirates, but at least we can deliver something back to headquarters." Before the other end could respond, Fontaine cut the line. A colonel standing nearby cleared his throat. "Sir, shall we renew the pursuit of the Ghost Hand pirates?" Fontaine cast the colonel a withering look. "Not yet. Hold your forces in reserve." With that, he turned back to his papers, masking his frustration behind a veneer of calm. A few days later, newspapers throughout the West Sea splashed their front pages with Admiral Rhodes's triumph. Yet amid the celebratory headlines, whispers circulated about the enigmatic youth who had appeared aboard the Admiral's vessel, Nethin, whose sudden presence promised to stir up a storm even greater than any pirate raid. The Ghost raced westward toward the Grand Route, its sails stretched tight in a brisk wind. On deck, Nethin held a freshly dropped bundle of newspapers, courtesy of Newsbird, and rifled through the headlines. "West Sea hegemony shifts again." Halfway through, he balled up the paper and pitched it into the swell. "These so-called news sheets are no more trustworthy than government pamphlets," he muttered. Robin, standing nearby, covered his mouth to stifle a laugh. "They'll never admit the real story. Still, Captain, you've become the West Sea's hottest topic." Nethin glanced up at Lafitte, who was perched high in the rigging, scanning the horizon. "Tell me, Lafitte, what's our speed? How long until we sight Bellowstown?" With a lithe leap, Lafitte dropped from the mast, landing as lightly as a falling leaf. "Captain, Bellowstown is the closest island to the Grand Route in the West Sea, our departure point, much like Rogatown in the East China Sea. At our present pace, we'll reach it within a month, weather permitting." Nethin gave a firm nod. "Allah be the navigation to you, Lafitte. Even if you're only serving as our navigator, having you at the helm will save me a great deal of time and effort." "Understood, Captain," Lafitte replied, bowing slightly before offering a confident smile. He watched as Nethin turned and strode back to the cabin. Before stepping aboard, Lafitte's understanding of Nethin had been built on little more than rumors and scattered intelligence reports. But over the past few days, he'd observed every nuance of the captain's leadership, calm in storms, decisive in battle, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. With each passing hour, he became more certain that Nethin was a commander truly worth following. Leaning on the railing, Lafitte allowed himself a private grin. "Just wait until we shake this world to its core," he thought, excitement burning in his chest. Chapter 57. Nethin stepped into the cabin and made his way to the small exercise room at the back. As soon as he closed the door, a translucent panel shimmered into view, a private interface only he could see. 3 talent trees hovered in the air before him. He focused first on the life tree. It had remained unchanged for as long as he could remember. Sailing proficiency, now at level 1. Before acquiring a navigator, Nethin had invested 1 free talent point here, but with reliable charts and a skilled pilot on board, that point was wasted. He reached out mentally, hoping to reclaim it, but the system refused. No free point redistribution, it seemed to say. Nethan sighed and switched to the combat tree, which now looked entirely different thanks to the newly unlocked knowledge specialization. Gunfire, 50 melee combat, 100 devil fruit, mastery, 215, 6 naval cuts, 6 naval forms, 6th form, moonstep, domineering aura. The domineering aura icon glowed a soft gold, indicating that although he hadn't allocated any points, he could still earn free talent points by training this skill in the field. He knew that proficiency bonuses would only grow through actual use, not by practice alone, so real combat lay ahead. Finally, he scanned the general tree. It, too, had been overhauled, but the panel offered little detail until he unlocked each branch. For now, the changes were mysterious, their benefits hidden behind locked nodes. Nethan leaned back, eyes tracing the outlines of his unspent talents. The system had grown stricter, points no longer came so easily, and proficiency required genuine effort. But that suited him. If mastering these abilities meant putting them to the test, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a determined nod, Nethan closed the panel. Tomorrow, he would begin field exercises to shore up his weakest arts and finally reap the rewards of gold border domineering aura. Attribute status, agility enhancement, level 100, advanced. Physical enhancement, level 200, maximum. After dispatching the Twin Blade Pirates, Nethan earned 2 free talent points and 110 talent proficiency points, ample resources for further growth. His overbearing gaze was already potent enough for now, but he knew that against an opponent whose speed outpaced his current perception threshold, merely seeing the attack wouldn't guarantee he could react in time. He weighed his options. Pumping more into arrogance or agility? Not worth it. His strength and speed were already balanced, and extra points in either would offer only marginal gains. Physical fitness? Having trained relentlessly, his body had long since outgrown the limits it faced when he first maxed that attribute. Even a surge in his twisted fruit power wouldn't threaten to overwhelm him, so there was no urgency to increase proficiency there. That left only one path: invest in mastering the twisted fruit ability. Nethan stared at the talent allocation screen. If he poured all 110 points into it, he'd instantly meet the prerequisites to unlock the Twisted Gravity branch ability. But if he assigned 85 proficiency points to the Twisted Fruit path, he'd be left with only 25 points to boost his physical attributes. Could such an unbalanced distribution sustain the massive distorting power he needed? He sighed. Dozens more proficiency points would solve the problem, but then he'd face new choices. Talent proficiency and free talent points were both precious and perpetually in short supply. Beyond raw proficiency, those 2 free talent points could unlock several desirable options: the armament-type overbear, the overlord-type overbear, or even a general enhancement to his powers. In theory, cultivating the armament overbear would be ideal. Armament-type abilities would synergize perfectly with Twisted Gravity's force manipulation. But Nethan had no cultivation method for the armament lineage and no clue where to find one. Without that missing piece, he couldn't pursue that path at all. Left with no clear solution, Nethan forced himself to think more creatively. Talent points were finite, but strategy and resourcefulness could sometimes compensate for raw numbers. He would need to study available options more closely and hope a new lead appeared before he made his final decision. Nethan had long ago dismissed the idea of relying on a battlefield awakening. It was far too uncertain. The domineering armed cultivation technique, even for practitioners on the Great Path, is notoriously rare in the early stages. It doesn't become widespread until the mid to late game of the New World. Without the power boost that domineering armed provides, anyone relying on devil fruit abilities, or even those blessed with innate talents, could find themselves hopelessly outmatched when real danger strikes. Rhodes had anticipated this vulnerability and warned him well in advance. Now, staring at the domineering armed branch on his talent tree, Nethan let out a steady breath. He placed his finger on the icon and spent one of his free talent points to unlock it. A low hum filled the air. His unspent points dropped from 2 to 1, and the emerald green lettering of domineering armed flared with golden light, transforming into a brilliant gold. In that moment, a surge of detailed knowledge about the technique flooded into Nethin's mind. He closed his eyes as the new power coursed through him, his body trembling with the intensity of what he'd just gained. Nethin barely had time to draw a breath before his mind reeled through what felt like 3 months of concentrated armament hockey training at the Conqueror's level. A warm pulse welled up in his chest and fanned out through every fiber of his body. It not only strengthened his physique, but also awakened a latent strand of hockey that had never before been stirred. When he finally opened his eyes, everything felt different. Alongside the raw surge of his devil fruit power, now awakened and trembling beneath his skin, another, wholly distinct force swirled within him. This was armament hockey, but charged with a commanding intensity he'd never known. It bore a faint resemblance to observation hockey in its subtle presence, yet in substance, it was utterly unique. At the sheer thought of it, an invisible aura bloomed around Nethin, coalescing into a flexible, impenetrable shell. In the past, every skill he triggered through his talent system had remained harmless to both himself and others. Now, however, the armament hockey encasing him radiated a domineering will of its own, and he could shape and wield it with flawless precision, without a whisper of hesitation. This was true Conqueror's armament. Nethin drew in the lingering chi that swirled around him. He murmured the activation phrase under his breath, and for a moment his eyes shimmered with focus. Concentrating all his will on his forearms, he called on his armament color's domineering arrogance to gather. A low hum filled the air as the aura coalesced, tightening into a thick sheath around his arm. Under his precise control, it pressed in, darkening, until, just as it should have hardened into a jet-black shell, it shattered with a crackling snap and dissolved back into scattered energy. He tried 2 more times, each attempt ending the same way. No matter how he directed the flow, the semi-solid armor wouldn't hold. In an instant, Nethin understood why. His armament color simply wasn't strong enough, and his body, though far stronger than a normal man's, lacked the necessary fortitude to sustain a hardened form. He let out a quiet sigh and shook his head. Summoning the raw aura was only the first step. To truly forge it into an unbreakable shell, he would need to cultivate his strength and deepen his control. Only then could he claim full mastery over this domineering armament. After mulling it over, Nethin decided against dumping his proficiency points into armament hockey. He still had a month before he'd officially step onto the grand line, and once he activated his hockey, he could continue honing it through regular practice. Even if he didn't reach the true hardening threshold in that time, he would still make steady progress, and that basic level of armament would be enough to hold its own against natural devil fruit users. His primary focus remained on the twisted fruit. As for hockey, he only needed enough mastery to crack the bug-like elementalization ability. There was no way he could push every skill to its peak all at once. That left him with 1 free talent point, which he chose to reserve. Once his twisted fruit proficiency climbed to 300, he'd need that point to unlock twisted gravity. The other 110 proficiency points sat unspent as Nethin stared at the branches of the twisted fruit skill tree, resisting the urge to distribute them hastily. Nethin closed his eyes and focused inward, drawing upon the raw energies of his devil fruit. With a single thought, he poured an extra 45 points into his talent proficiency. A brilliant flash of light confirmed that his mastery of the distortion fruit had soared to 260 points. Almost instantly, a fierce heat erupted from his core, igniting the twisting power that coiled within his veins. Bathed in that searing warmth, his distortion abilities surged to unprecedented levels. Chapter 58. The Red Hair Pirates. Nethin closed his eyes and let himself fully feel the searing heat coursing through his veins, along with the greatly amplified distortion power simmering within him. When the burning sensation finally ebbed, he opened his eyes, flexed his fingers into fists, and tested the limits of his newfound strength. Before spending those 45 proficiency points, the range of his twisted fruit ability had been a roughly 30-meter radius centered on himself. Now he could sense that the distortion field extended nearly 50 meters in every direction. enough to envelop the entire deck of the ship and even reach down to the water directly beneath the hull. Whitebeard's quake fruit could trigger massive sea quakes, and though Nethin's twisted fruit was naturally capable of a similar effect, its area of influence had always been noticeably smaller, until now. He allowed himself a small, satisfied grin. His distortion power had skyrocketed, and although that placed a heavier burden on his body, his physical fitness had long since outpaced the growth of his devil fruit. In other words, his enhanced physiology was more than up to the task of handling this dramatic power boost. Nethin opened his stance, feeling the distortion energy ripple around him like an invisible tide. With this expanded reach, he could dominate the entire ship, and anyone who dared stand in his way wouldn't know what hit them. Nethin paused to find the right balance. After a moment's hesitation, he invested 20 proficiency points into physical enhancement and 30 into twisted fruit. Immediately, he felt another surge of power. His twisted fruit ability now reached nearly 70 meters. As he'd predicted, higher proficiency yielded ever greater gains in fruit power, even as the returns on raw physical strength began to taper off. Feeling the subtle shift in his body, Nethin's eyes flickered with newfound resolve. This disparity made it clear he couldn't rely on point allocations alone. He would need rigorous physical training to handle the increased fruit power safely. He had hoped to push his distortion ability all the way to 300 in one go, but it started to overflow at 290. Reluctantly, he channeled the remaining 15 points into physical enhancement instead. Now, activating twisted gravity would cost him more than one unused talent point, but Nethin was certain it would be worth every drop of energy. Nethin stared at the glowing talent panel hovering before him. Even if he pushed his twisted fruit mastery all the way to 300, the next ability, twisted gravity, wouldn't unlock for some time. Pacing his progress then was wiser. He needed to raise both his physical attributes and devil fruit power in tandem, with a little domineering hockey on the side. With that in mind, he dispatched another 110 proficiency points. Immediately the numbers shifted. Gunshots 50, melee combat 100, twisted fruit 290, Rokushiki Tekai 0, Rokushiki Kami 0, Rokushiki Geppo 0, Zyoku Haki, Busoshoku Haki, armament 0. Twisted fruit was now just 10 points shy of its second tier. All Rokushiki techniques, however, remained untouched. Once his physical strength and agility enhancements both reached their 500-point caps, he planned to funnel extra proficiency into Tekai and Geppo, two moves he'd long coveted. For now, his active enhancements read: Agility Enhancement, 100, Advanced, Strength Enhancement, 235. His overall power distribution hadn't changed drastically, but his devil fruit ability had more than doubled in potency. Where once his raw muscle had outshone the twisted fruit's power, the balance had now tipped firmly in the fruit's favor. Satisfied, Nethin closed the panel. Preparation and patience, he knew, would make all the difference in the battles to come. Nethin shook his head in frustration. Even though he'd just restored 15 points of stamina, he still couldn't match the escalating force of distortion. Of course, that meant one thing. The Mo meant he truly let loose, his distortion power would spike to a fearsome level. Rear Admiral Ghost Spider, who had once overpowered him, would now be utterly helpless against such strength. How does my power compare to a lieutenant general's? Nethin wondered, his brow furrowing. There's a huge gap between a major general and a lieutenant general. It's almost unheard of for a major general at headquarters to leap directly into a lieutenant general's post there. Typically, major generals are reassigned to a regional command, serve as a branch lieutenant general, and only after notable military achievements are they ever considered for promotion back at headquarters. Nethin paused to reassess his own capabilities. Setting aside his carrying limit for a moment, he realized that if he fully unleashed his power, his so-called overload state, he could hold his own against the weaker lieutenant generals. In fact, most of the standard lieutenant generals in the fleet wouldn't be much of a challenge. Reflecting on the raw strength he'd displayed with the Ghost Spider ability, he rough calculated that, even before embarking on the Grand Tour, few in the entire sea could claim to surpass a headquarters major general or stand toe-to-toe with a lieutenant general the way he could now. That clarity of self-assessment left him with one inescapable conclusion. He had to build up his physical foundation even further, especially if he wanted to master the armed domineering technique. His devil fruit power was unbelievably potent, but it also taxed his body severely. To wield his armament arts at full throttle, he needed ironclad endurance and strength to back them up. Within minutes, Nethin sketched out a brutal short-term regimen. He would push his limits on pure strength training, then double the volume of his push-ups and squats. 1,000 reps per set, 2 sets back-to-back, no half measures, no shortcuts. He strode across the deck to the weight rack, stacked the heaviest plates he could find onto the barbell, and began. Every lift, every press, every rep was a deliberate step toward forging the body he needed. His muscles trembled, sweat stung his eyes, and his breath came in ragged bursts, but he kept going. 15 days later, Nethin stood taller and more unyielding than before. The half-month of relentless training had transformed him, even if only someone of true caliber would recognize just how far he'd come. Nethin found himself with more free time than ever. With Lafitte at the helm, the ship practically sailed itself, leaving Nethin to split his days between vigorous workouts and well-deserved rest. Whenever his muscles ached, Robin would quietly slip into the massage parlor she'd set up below deck. Thanks to her devil fruit powers, she could sprout extra arms wherever Nethin needed them, kneading out knots and tension with uncanny precision. The relief was profound. Nethin couldn't help but smile at how Robin's talents were evolving. It almost felt as if she were training for combat, an idea he instantly dismissed. He liked his companions as they were. Brilliant minds, unique fighters, not bodybuilders. If Robin ever started flexing rippling muscles of her own, he suspected he'd be the first to complain. Meanwhile, not far off in the shimmering sunlight and steady breeze, the ghost shadow drifted into view. Unlike most pirate ships, it carried none of the usual menace. Its crew lounged on deck, feasting on roasted meat and quenching their thirst with fine grog, as if they'd never seen a galleon before. They paid no mind to the merchant routes below or the navy squadrons that might be lurking beyond the horizon, and yet one glance at the flag snapping above the Ghost Shadow's mast would send any naval warship running for the hills. That ominous black banner was enough to chill the spine of every sailor in these waters. To see it unfurl in the breeze was to know instantly that you were home, at least if home were a den of pirates and legends. Beckman stepped up to where the scarlet-haired Shanks stood at the bow, a cigar dangling from his lips. Shanks, draped in a loose cloak and wearing nothing more formal than a pair of slip-on sandals, looked utterly at ease as he stared out across the endless blue. He cracked a small smile and murmured, "Not bad. Almost 20 years." He fell silent for a moment, lost in thought. It felt like ages ago that he'd signed on as an apprentice under Pirate King Gold D. Roger. 13 years had passed since Roger claimed the title, and 11 years since he ignited the great pirate era. Of all Roger's crew, only Shanks had been entrusted with the captain's cherished straw hat, and he'd lived up to every expectation. In just over a decade, he'd carved out his own legend, one of the 4 emperors, ruling the New World alongside the mightiest pirates. Yet even now, standing on the deck with sea spray on his face, Shanks felt there was more to be done. One day soon, he'd return to his home port, cruise through the East Blue one last time, and then set his sights on whatever lay beyond this horizon. He lifted a hand to the brim of his straw hat, resolve shining in his eyes. "Let's see how far we've really come." Beckman leaned back against the rail, a crooked grin on his face. "First I turn up in the Western Sea without warning, and now I've got to sail all the way to the Eastern Sea. I'll bet the Navy and the government are in an uproar." "Let them stew," Shanks replied with a faint smile. "If they really want to take us on, they'll need at least 3 top-tier warships. Anything less won't touch us, and the government certainly won't risk igniting an all-out war over a handful of pirates." He closed his eyes, savoring the salty breeze. Just then, the lookout's urgent cry cut through the afternoon quiet. "Captain! A pirate ship off the port bow!" Chapter 59. Dawn's light stretched across the rolling sea as the Ghost cut through the foam-streaked waves. Perched high atop the mainmast, Lafitte gripped the wooden guardrail with one hand and raised his telescope with the other. He scanned the horizon until a dark silhouette materialized against the pale sky. Another ship, its outline still hazy in the morning air. Lafitte's keen eye narrowed. Minutes passed as the two vessels closed the distance, the formless shadow sharpening into the unmistakable shape of a brigantine. Then the flag snapped into view, a crimson banner emblazoned with a grinning skull. Lafitte's usually impassive face flickered with alarm. This was no merchantman, and certainly no run-of-the-mill pirate ship. "With me," he murmured, lowering the spyglass. In a single fluid motion, he vaulted from the mast and landed on the deck below. At his side stood Nethin, the Ghost's newest crew member, peering up at Lafitte with wide eyes. Robin, stationed near the helm, cast a curious glance toward them both. Lafitte spoke without preamble. "Call the captain," he ordered Robin in a low voice. Then, to Nethin's astonishment, he added, "That ship, those colors belong to the Red Hair Pirates." Robin's breath caught. "The Red Hair Pirates?" he echoed. He had expected a harmless merchant vessel, or, at worst, a ragtag band of sea thieves. The Red Hair Pirates, however, were infamous throughout the Grand Line. Their reputation for ferocity and daring made even seasoned captains think twice before crossing their path. Nethin's heart pounded. He'd heard the legends, a crew led by the indomitable Shanks, whose exploits were etched into every sailor's story. To encounter them on these waters meant only one thing: danger. Yet as he met Lafitte's steady gaze, a spark of excitement ignited in him. This was no ordinary chase. Whatever lay ahead, Nethin knew the Ghost would have to face it head-on, and he was ready. Robin found Nethin in the exercise room and paused him mid-spar when she reported the sighting of the Red Hair Pirates. Startled, he excused himself and hurried up to the deck, his expression instantly grave. Taking Lafitte's spyglass, he studied the ship that fast approached on the horizon. "It really is the Red Hair Pirates," he said thoughtfully. "If my reckoning is correct, this is August of year 11 in the Great Pirate Era. Shanks is due to turn up near Windmill Village around now, and once he arrives, he's known to linger for about a year." "Captain," Lafitte ventured, clearing his throat, "should we change course to avoid them? For all our optimism, they're a force nobody underestimates." Nethin lowered the spyglass and traced the two vessels' paths through the air. "No need to panic," he replied evenly. "Our headings won't intersect. At most, we'll sail past each other. It's still dangerous, of course, but there's no risk of a direct collision." Lafitte's brow furrowed in lingering concern, but he nodded and fell in step beside his captain. Nethin stood at the bow with his hands clasped behind his back, unwavering. He had no intention of yawing wide to dodge the scarlet-sailed ship bearing down on them. When it came to the Beast Pirates or the Big Mom Pirates, he might give way and skirt around them, but there was no reason to shy away from the Red Hair Pirates. After all, the four emperors were on his long-term hit list, but now was far too early in his journey to tangle with Shanks's crew. He narrowed his eyes at the crimson sails growing larger on the horizon. A few paces behind him, Robin caught sight of the same approaching vessel and felt a flicker of tension ripple through her. Very little shook her composure. She still remembered how Admiral Chingji chilled her to the bone. But the Red Hair Pirates were the sort of force that no Navy admiral would ever provoke lightly. As the distance between the two ships steadily decreased, their courses revealed themselves. Not a head-on clash, but two lines running almost parallel. Before long, they would slip past each other at barely 30 or 40 meters apart, then vanish into the vast expanse of the sea. Robin and Lafitte exchanged anxious glances as the strange ship closed to 100 meters, but Nethin stood firm on the deck of the Ghost Shadow, treating the encounter as if it were nothing more than routine merchant traffic. 90 meters. 80. As the gap narrowed, every detail on the enemy vessel snapped into focus. The intricate rigging, the weathered timbers, and the two silhouettes braced on its prow. One figure was draped in a black cloak, the other tilted a yellow straw hat against the wind. It could only be Shanks, the red-haired emperor of the New World. 40 meters, 30. Then, almost imperceptibly, the closing speed slackened. At that 30-meter mark, Nethin and Shanks stood eye to eye, their expressions clear across the water. For a heartbeat, neither ship gained ground. Then the distance began to widen again. 40 meters, 50. until side by side, the hulls slipped past one another without a single shot fired. As the red-haired pirates drew away, Lafitte and Robin both exhaled in unison. They turned to each other, saw the beads of cold sweat marring each forehead, and let out the sigh they'd been holding for far too long. Nethin watched the other ship glide away, his face a mask of calm. After a moment, he spoke without turning back. "Never mind. Set course for Bellowstown." Then he slipped into the cabin and disappeared. On the deck of the red-haired pirate's ship, most of the crew were too busy feasting on roast meat and downing flagon after flagon of wine to notice the ghost shadow sail past. Even the few who spotted it simply shrugged and lifted their cups. Only Shanks stood at the bow, crimson hair whipping in the wind, his gaze fixed on the fading silhouette of Rhodes's vessel. He didn't blink until the hull had drifted out of sight. Then he shook his head and ran a hand through his hair, a strange look in his eye. "That guy just now, there was something off about him," Shanks muttered. Standing a few paces behind, lucky rookie Beckman arched an eyebrow. "You want to chase them?" Shanks turned, his eyes distant. "No," he said softly, but his gaze, it was unlike anything I've seen. "I've got a hunch we'll meet again." Beckman let out a low whistle and cracked a grin. "A hunch from you is never to be taken lightly. To think we'd encounter someone who could unsettle Shanks in the West Blue." He fell silent, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. That must have been Rhodes, the ghost hand of the West Sea. I'd glanced at the newspaper earlier. Based on their heading, those pirates were bound for the Grand Line. It was virtually impossible we'd bump into them again so soon. It had to be pure coincidence. After all, any crew determined to follow would first have to conquer the first half of the Grand Line, a trial that swallowed countless ships. Maybe Shanks's intuition was nothing more than a lucky guess. Once the red-haired pirates drifted out of sight, calm returned to the ghost shadow. Lafayette settled back at the helm, charting our course with steady hands. Robin immersed herself in her books, sending the ship's handyman off to scrub the decks now and then, or lending Lafayette a hand with the rigging. Rhodes slipped into the training room, pushing her body to its limits and refining every technique, and Nethin retreated to the armory. There, in front of a steel-reinforced wall, he stood motionless, eyes closed. He drew in a steady breath and focused inward, gathering his armament hockey in his right fist. Compared to 2 weeks ago, its aura had grown noticeably stronger, thicker, more concentrated, buzzing with energy. Still, no matter how ardently he willed it, the final step eluded him. He could not yet harden it into that pitch-black shell. He struck the wall. The impact rattled every bone in his arm, but the surface remained unmarked. Nethin exhaled, wiped sweat from his brow, and readied himself for another round. He would master that final stage. He had to. Nethin shook his head. Still not enough. He clenched his fist, wreathed it in a faint violet aura, and drove it into the thick iron wall. Boom! He hadn't invoked the distortion technique, only the raw reinforcement of armed color, but the impact still reverberated through the chamber, making the barrier tremble. Sweat beaded on his brow as he tested the same strike again and again, each blow ringing louder than the last. If he kept this up, he thought, in another 2 weeks he might finally break through to true armed color hardening. And once he did, nothing would stand between him and his next challenge. Chapter 60. 2 weeks later, Nethin's ghost shadow at last reached the outskirts of the calm sea current and docked at Bellowstown, the westernmost island before the upside-down mountain. Known as the gateway to the Grand Line, Bellowstown teemed with merchants, smugglers, and pirates. Even so, when the ghost shadow pulled into port, the entire wharf buzzed with excitement and fear. As the most notorious crew in the West Sea, the Ghost Shadow Pirates' reputation had already preceded them. Nethin stood on the quarterdeck, scanning the busy docks. He turned to his officers, Robin and Lafitte. "Before we push on, we need fresh water, provisions, and most importantly, a log pose. The Grand Line won't wait for us." "Aye, Captain," Lafitte replied with a confident grin. He tapped his crimson-tipped staff against the rail. "Consider it done." He stepped down the gangplank, eager to take charge of securing their navigation. With skills that could have earned him an officer's post aboard the Blackbeard pirates, Lafitte was more than qualified and fiercely loyal to Nethin's crew. Robin folded her arms, offering a nod of agreement. I'll handle the supplies and local contacts. We'll have everything we need by nightfall. Nethan smiled, satisfied. Good. Stay sharp. This is the last safe port before we enter the Grand Line. With that, the Ghost Shadow pirates dispersed into the chaos of Belos Town, each member poised to bring the ship one step closer to the ultimate prize, the One Piece. Nethan was still just a native of the West Blue. He'd never set foot on the Grand Line and knew next to nothing about charting navigation points. But with Lafitte and Robin at his side, he wasn't about to head into unknown waters unprepared. All right, Nethan said, handing Lafitte the ship's logbook. You take care of charting our waypoints and recording anything we spot. He turned to Robin. I'll leave the fresh water and provisions to you. Lafitte and Robin nodded and hurried off the Ghost Shadow's deck toward the dock. With no pressing errands left for himself and not much desire to go ashore, Nethan settled on the ship's rail, watching the two disappear into the bustle of Belos Town's port market. News of the Ghost Hand pirates' arrival reached the local naval branch almost as quickly as the crew did. Inside the branch office, Colonel Uchimura slammed his fist onto the desk so hard the papers rattled. He sprang to his feet. The Ghost Hand pirates are in port? He bellowed. Sir? Yes, sir, stammered the naval major standing before him. Cold sweat beaded at the younger officer's temples. Their ship was spotted docked at the harbor just a few minutes ago. Uchimura's eyes narrowed. What are your recommendations? Do we seal off the docks and surround them immediately? The major swallowed as he gathered his thoughts. If you think that's necessary, sir. They haven't shown hostile intent yet. Uchimura paced, each step echoing off the stone floor. We'll prepare a squadron for inspection. I want every exit monitored. Keep me informed the moment they make any move. The major saluted crisply. Aye, Colonel. Right away. Outside, the Ghost Shadow rocked gently against the piers of Belos Town, its crew unaware that the Navy's eyes were already closing in. Colonel Uchimura's face tightened with tension. He shook his head gravely. No, I must report this to headquarters first. As the officer in charge of the Belos Town detachment, he was still just a colonel. He knew he couldn't measure up against the general-grade commanders of the West Sea Fleet. Far from earning a promotion to branch major general, he would simply be reassigned to naval headquarters, still a colonel, but back in the capital. And yet, even there, he realized how hopeless any clash with the Ghost Hand pirates would be. Those raiders had already crushed and sunk the West Sea Fleet under Major General Ghost Spider's command. Naval headquarters wasted no time relaying Uchimura's report to the West Sea Department, and a heavy silence fell over the entire office. Every officer in that room held the rank of Senior Admiral, and Ghost Spider had been one of their finest. None of them ever imagined that he would meet his end so far from home, out in the unforgiving expanse of the West Sea. From the days when Nethan, once a celebrated pirate hunter, first slipped into the shadows as a pirate, he was barely a footnote at headquarters. Now, mere mention of the Ghost Hand pirates sends the entire command into a frenzy. Admiral Doberman arrived at the naval office with grim purpose. Since the West Sea Fleet, led by the infamous Ghost Spider, had been shattered, Doberman had taken personal charge of every matter connected to the Ghost Hand pirates. All signs pointed to their next move. Belos Town, a bustling port notorious for loose tongues and even looser laws. It looked as if the pirates were about to set sail for their biggest score yet. From a hidden listening device under the mahogany desk, a trembling voice reported every heartbeat of Ghost Hand activity. Doberman listened without a word, then turned to Colonel Uchimura, who stood at rigid attention. Colonel, he said crisply, hold your vessels. Under no circumstances are we to engage the Ghost Hand pirates, at least for now. Sir, Uchimura's salute faltered. Under her command, any pirate fleet that surfaced near Belos Town was immediately encircled and destroyed. 3 of the 10 most notorious pirate groups had already met their end under her guns. Yet here she was, ordered to do nothing. Doberman's eyes were steel. That's an order. Maintain position. Wait for further instructions. Colonel Uchimura bowed, her face a mask of shock and confusion. For the first time, the Navy would stand down in Belos Town, watching, waiting, but unwilling to fire the first shot. And in that silence, the Ghost Hand Pirates prepared to write the next chapter of their legend. Doberman's eyes were hard as he replaced the receiver. He knew full well that with the Bellowstown Naval Detachment under his command, he could handle pirates with bounties up to 30 or 40 million. But the Ghost Hand Pirates were in a completely different league. "If you want to take your fight to the Grand Line," he had told the caller, "you're welcome to try. I'll be waiting for you there. Don't think the Grand Line is like the West Sea. You can't just run wild." He hung up, and a bitter smile crept across his face. The real worry wasn't whether Nethin would dare to show up on the Grand Line. It was the day he didn't. Meanwhile, Nethin remained stranded in the West Sea, and the situation was growing desperate. None of the regional bases in the West Sea had the strength to eradicate the Ghost Hand Pirates on their own. Calling for reinforcements from naval headquarters, or from the Grand Line itself, was easier said than done. Logistics, politics, chain of command. The obstacles piled up faster than any admiral's orders could travel. Still, there was one undeniable fact. Setting foot on the Grand Line changed the equation entirely. Once Nethin crossed that threshold, he'd be operating under the Navy's full protection. Fleet deployments there eclipsed anything the West Sea could muster. If he could just make it to the Grand Line, the balance of power might finally tilt in his favor. Perhaps Nethin never made it into naval jurisdiction at all, lost to the sea before he could even reach the Ghost Hand Pirates. Admiral Doberman wasted no time. Alert every naval detachment around Upside Down Mountain, monitor all pirate vessels entering the Great Route, and report their every move. The moment the Ghost Hand Pirates appear, we strike, wipe them out without mercy. I will not give Rhodes another chance to grow. Within minutes, rear admirals across the fleet acknowledged the order. They activated all listening posts and communication relays, then relaxed only when the admiral's directive was fully in motion. After all, once Rhodes sets foot on the Great Route, local commands officially lose jurisdiction, but that hardly matters. The Great Route is so heavily fortified that even pirates carrying bounties in the hundreds of millions find themselves crushed by unseen forces. A mere footnote in the western seas, the Ghost Hand Pirates will barely register a ripple there. Meanwhile, in the bustling port of Bellowstown, Rhodes sails on, completely unaware that the Navy has already begun tightening its noose. Nethin didn't care, even if he knew they were after him. The Navy was on his trail, and he was ready. He'd been waiting for this moment ever since he set his sights on the Grand Line. The seas there teemed with pirates carrying bounties of 100 million, 200 million, even 300 million berries, and not to mention the feared 7 warlords of the sea. To Nethin, it felt like a hunter stepping into the heart of the jungle, eyes locked on his prey, a slow grin spreading across his face. Each of those powerful adversaries would be another rung on the ladder he was determined to climb, bringing him ever closer to the top of this world. The instant he crossed into the Grand Line, the countdown began. For every pirate who'd written him off, for every enemy who'd sworn to erase him, doomsday was coming. And Nethin planned to be the one delivering it.